Okay, no changes from what we presented, what we distributed now to what's going to be here tonight?
No changes.
Okay, I'm sure today, I think Mindy had, okay.
One, two, three, four.
She was right.
One of the changes.
I think it'd be great. Are y'all working on any like the school choice thing? Are y'all?
The ones that.
Chantel, one.
Those are three things that you.
Oh, you. I wrote them in.
Okay.
I figured you did. I wrote them in my thing. So if I say it wrong, you can just jump up and say it.
That's not right.
DFFA?
Yeah. Yep. This is what they're changing.
Is there one that you're going to be doing?
It says strike out the right word, not
Are the different options that we could do vertically aligned with that?
they didn't catch it.
And I want the principals and the ADs to brainstorm.
It's on the consent agenda item too.
They have a couple of meetings before they go to the not doing.
That's scattered, say, what do you want? They all want that much.
Yeah, they get vested. It's like,
I don't like this.
Wait a minute.
The time now is 12:09 p.m. and we are back from recess. Before we begin our performance monitoring reports and discussions today, I'm asking both the board and the administration to be mindful of the times we've set for each section. In accordance with BE Local, if we find the need to extend the time, I'll assess where we are in the discussion and adjust the time accordingly. All trustees will be provided an equal opportunity to speak. Trustees, we are now on agenda item number 5, performance monitoring. We will begin with item 5A, campus rated improvement required and formally improvement required improvement plans. Dr. Smisko.
Police trustees, Dr. Chinosky will start this presentation and I'll
We're here today to review some of the major highlights of the improvement plans of the improvement required and formerly improvement required campuses that will be the subject of a public hearing on November 20th. According to the Texas Education Code and the Administrative Code, how this works is that each year a campus is assigned an unacceptable performance rating, a campus intervention team, which is made up of a PSP, a professional service provider, and an ED. Those two individuals make up the set. Continue to work with the campus until the campus satisfies all of the performance standards, and also those two individuals are to assist in updating an action plan, improvement plan, to analyze areas of growth and areas that require improvement. Furthermore, the Education Code states that after those improvement plans are written, one must conduct a public hearing for the purpose of notifying the public of the plan, solicit public comment on that target improvement plan, which will be on November 20th, and submit that improvement plan to the commissioner for approval. In your Friday packets, you also had given to you community meeting dates that the campuses had. That is not required, but each campus was asked to have a community meeting date with their community to also go over these plans and inform them what was taking place. The schools involved in this process, there are improvement required IR1 campuses. You'll see them so listed in the presentation. And the multi-year campuses, which comprise IR2, 3, and 4, again, you will see them listed in the campuses. In addition to those improvement required campuses, there are formally improvement required. These are campuses that were on the IR list last year, and this year they are off, but they were required in their first year to also develop a plan and submit those plans to the board for approval. Some of the highlights of the plans, the needs, the goals, and the interventions, Dr. Smisko is going to review with you.
Before I move into the highlights there, I just wanted to mention that we did have an increase in the number of IR improvement required campuses from last year to this year, and I just wanted to highlight that there's probably, in my head, 3 main reasons for that. The first of which is that the passing standard on the tests was increased by TEA, so kids had to get more items right on the tests. In addition, high schools had EOCs for the first time. More kids had to pass in order to meet the IR standard. So the previous year, 50% of the students had to pass the test. In the current year, 55%. So there was an increase in the passing standard and then the number of kids that had to pass. And then finally, there are just more students counted in the system. So for example, English language learners previously were not counted in some of the groups, and they were counted in the 13-14 school year. So that is at least some of the big high-level reasons for the increase in the number of campuses, although we did, as Chuck said, had 14 campuses that moved off IR, so we had many successful campuses as well, even though they're monitored for the second year. So on the just some of the needs that our campuses, generally speaking, identified is school culture. Of course, that's something that we work on, and we know that's really important. Making sure that the curriculum is aligned well, especially aligned to the state standards, the TEKS, which are the tested standards. Sure that within a rigorous learning environment, all kids are engaged, and that's something we work on as well. These campuses thought about and proposed customized interventions for their particular students in their individual plans, making sure that they generate data for decision making through formative and summative assessments, so making sure they understand on an ongoing basis where kids are, and building a support network for first year teachers. We have some of the campuses have a number of first-year teachers, and we just want to make sure that those teachers are prepared. So, of course, all of their goals have to do with improving achievement in the 4 tested areas: reading, writing, mathematics, social studies, and science. So some of the key intervention highlights, and we just pulled these from the various plans, but most campuses addressed some kind of tiered professional development. We supported the budget that provided instructional coaches at every single campus, and so we're making the best use possible of the instructional coaches, making sure that there are monthly data team meetings so that the campus takes a look at where kids are each month, and the executive directors of the feeder patterns are also a key part of that discussion. Making sure that professional learning communities, in other words, groups of teachers that are teaching the same kids and or the same subject area, are supported with professional development at the campus level. Creating tiered groups of kids who have the same kinds of needs and making sure that those interventions are delivered to the students that need the particular interventions. The spot observations provide feedback to the teachers, and improving that system, making sure that principals are geared up to provide really positive feedback and provide helpful guidance to teachers who need additional support. Making sure that the culture is data-driven, making sure we know where kids are, how well they are doing the, two-digit multiplication, et cetera, making sure we know specifically where they need additional support through that data-driven culture, and then creating assessments at the campus level, not district assessments, but making sure that teachers do those quick formative assessments to see whether or not students have learned the particular essential knowledge and skill that they're supposed to learn. So those are some of the highlights of the intervention plans. We did provide a CD, I believe, with all the plans on them. And I just want to say one quick word about that particular set of intervention plans. The Texas Education Agency has a very prescribed way of asking for those plans. It actually looks a lot like it's almost a it's a form that the campus must fill out. So these are not the whole entire campus action plan. This particular requirement for TEA is focused on the particular area where the campus has to improve. So, for example, fourth grade mathematics. And it's almost in some ways, a click-through, it's a check the box type form. So it may not look as robust as you would think a normal campus action plan is, but it's not the normal action plan. It is the particular form that TEA requires. But all of the thinking that went into what do we need to do to improve is represented in those plans. So with that, I'll see if board members have questions.
Trustees? Start with Trustee Foreman.
Hello. First I want to register a concern. I did not know about the campus meetings, and I think it would have been nice for all of the trustees. I did find out from other trustees that their EDs invited them. I didn't get that invitation, and I think it would be nice for all of the trustees to know when these meetings are taking place on the campus. Specifically for me, being a new trustee and finding out I have about 4 schools that are the first time on the IR list, which is a great concern of mine, and would have loved to have been there to understand what that intervention plan was. So my recommendation is that that information be filtered, Mr. Superintendent, to all of the trustees, so we'll know, when those meetings are going to take place.
Yes, ma'am.
Question. Now, the TEA did an assessment of the IR schools. What are we doing to follow the initiatives that maybe have been brought forth toward us? I know we had new principals at many of the schools. So how is that going to work? How is that going to affect what we're trying to do with the new principals?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite grasping your question. No. The TEA did an assessment of the schools. That's in the...
Yes.
Ma'am.
This was done on July the 21st.
DFFA.
Is that correct?
Oh, that's the TEA audit, and that was not the audit of these particular schools.
But it does speak to some things that might be germane
Absolutely. Yes,
to
ma'am.
these schools. So now we're on the same page?
So,
Okay. So there were 50 campus new principals, correct? Or somewhere like that.
there were new principals at campuses,
So were
yes.
there new principals at all of the IR schools?
There were 14 new principals at the 43 campuses that are IR. Not all of those 14 are new. Some of them came from other buildings, but there are
They're new to that campus?
They're new to that campus on 14 of the 43.
And one of the things that troubles me a great deal is the retention of teachers. Clearly, the retention of teachers for these IR schools is going to be something that I think we really need to look at. So have we done anything to assess the number of new teachers? Because I know that this year, 47% or 50% of the teachers that we hired had no experience. So are we putting inexperienced teachers on these campuses?
Well, there are certainly, as I mentioned in the presentation, these campuses do have a number of new teachers. We are not deliberately putting new teachers on the campus. We are not deliberately not putting new teachers on the campus. The principal hires the teachers and tries to get the person with the best fit and the best skills. So there are new teachers on the campus, but it's not a deliberate attempt.
That's not where I'm going, because
Okay.
I think there should be a deliberate attempt to look at the teachers that we put on these campuses based on the fact that they are IR. So there should be some deliberation in the moves that we make and where we put teachers.
there is some deliberation. We'll give you, for example, at the job fairs, we allowed the campuses that are Tier 1 campuses, and those are the IR schools and focus and priority schools, to have an hour before everybody else. They had the job fair so that they can have a better chance of getting the most qualified people. We also look at when people move, we're not allowing people to move unless they're proficient. And then with the teacher evaluation, which it's hard to keep somebody from moving to an IR school if they're evaluated proficient or higher, and 96% of all of our teachers were. But with the new evaluation system, that won't be the case. And we've incentivized teachers going to Tier 1 schools because they get an additional 3 to 5 points for working in a Tier 1 school. So we're trying to incentivize rather than forcing people to go to Tier 1 schools.
3 to 5 points on their evaluation.
That's additional points on their evaluation.
Trustee Mitchell?
I know I've made this point at least a half a dozen times, but the feedback that I get from teachers on the campus is that there's not enough differentiation in terms of the kinds of things that TEA requires. The same number of spot observations for an experienced teacher who by now the administration should know is effective or not effective as a brand new teacher. And when you look at an IR school with a bunch of new teachers in it, you have to wonder whether it makes a lot of sense to spend as much time or as much time as we do with experienced teachers that we have determined are effective as it does with a brand new teacher. It would seem that if you only have a certain amount of coaching time, a certain amount of principal time that you can allocate, that it ought to be allocated to the teachers who are inexperienced and need the coaching, or who are not quite as effective as the group of teachers that have already been identified as being very effective. But like I said, I've made this point because the feedback is continuing that the failure to differentiate results in a misallocation of resources. And when you look at an IR school with new teachers, you just wonder whether we should be making some sort of adjustment in terms of the number of or the amount of time that is the principal and the coaches spend with effective teachers versus inexperienced or less effective teachers.
If I may, it's a good point. It remains a good point. And when right now all teachers get 10 spot observations under TEI, that's the rule. And so we're going to go through this first year with that, and then we'll take it to the teacher focus group. But I'm already for input. But we will differentiate the number of spot observations that distinguished teachers get next year. We've already mentioned to the teacher focus group that there'll probably be, if you're distinguished, you only get 6. If you're proficient, you only get 8. And then if you're less than proficient, you'll get the 10, which is what it is now. So there'll be a movement towards in that direction. Right now, what happens is if you're really struggling, you actually get more than 10. Principals have really tried to differentiate that way. But you're absolutely right. Even our distinguished teachers today, although we don't know for sure whether they're distinguished, even the teachers that are doing great are getting 10 spot observations, and we think that problem will be rectified next year.
But I think the general point remains, and because I get the feedback regularly, I bring it to the board table, to the administration, that it seems like we have not figured out who needs the most coaching, and and allocated our resources to those that need the most coaching. Instead, more or less, everybody gets the same amount, and that's what I'm hearing. And I think, it's worth looking at whether there's a better way to give more autonomy to those who have already been identified at the campus level or through the evaluation process as not needing as much help, because you also have some backlash there when you spend time coaching somebody who really doesn't need it, and you tell them to do something that is going to polish whatever their technique is, but they look at it as being not really serious help. At the same time, you have an inexperienced teacher that needs more help. So I'll stop on that point for now. I'm sure I'll bring it up again at another meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Mitchke. Trustee Jones?
Yeah, I first want to compliment the 14 schools that made it off of IR, and I specifically want to call out one of the schools in District 1, which is Gooch Elementary. Very proud of the work they're doing, the high degree of intensity and coaching and tutoring their students, the commitment from everybody. But it really took a village there, an entire community of resources that have stood behind that school and have been there with it every step of the way. And it's not a one-year deal. It's been an ongoing process, but certainly in the last year they have really made sure that it happened. And I commend the entire community for getting behind them. My concern is that not much of that it came through the structured part of the plans that we're looking at as far as helping our children. And I'm wondering, it seems to me there's a bit of a disconnect between what TEA wants and what actually would work for the schools. Would help those schools improve. Now, we had 23 schools that got worse in 1 year. Schools that were not on IR previously. And you've heard me be a broken record about the fact that if you can get 14 schools to improve, then why during that same period are we seeing a degradation of 23 that got worse? Now, I've pulled apart some of the data, and I've been looking at what I think are some patterns, and I'd like to maybe call them out because I think it starts to tell a story. I mean, first of all, we do know that more of our secondary schools are now part of that data set. And it was explained that obviously with new requirements that some of that is there. But, traditionally some of these schools haven't been doing all that, have not been great, but the trends are that they're declining. They're not improving in a lot of key areas. And that's concerning to me. That's something I think needs a closer look. Because I do believe that high schools and middle schools have very different needs as far as supporting them than an elementary school if we're going to talk about truly impacting student achievement. So that's my first concern. My second concern in looking at the data is we have entire feeder patterns with no IR schools. And I'm going to call them out. W.T. White, Hillcrest, Wilson, Skyline, and Sunset. From my analysis, those 5 feeder patterns out of our 21 feeder patterns, because we've now consolidated, had no IR schools. So I think it's worth mentioning that you can have an entire feeder pattern and see consistency of performance and standards of quality in maintaining course, even with, in many of these cases, children of extreme high poverty or a lot of the same conditions. The third thing I discovered is a lot of the schools affected are within specific zip codes. And economically, when I started to pull the analysis, I also noticed that the areas that they're in have had long-term challenges, which I believe is part of what may be impacting the schools. The fourth thing that I discovered was that many of these schools are obviously inside of our Imagine 2020 plans, and I guess I would like to see a further analysis on why those schools are declining when we've had specific programmatic resources focused exclusively on supporting them and what isn't working, because that seems counterindicative to me. And if I recall, there was 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like there's about 14 of the IRs, maybe more, that are part of that. So that would be an interesting analysis unto itself. And some of those were first year, as opposed to others that have been repetitive. And then lastly, there was very indicative minority concentrations in these IR schools. You know, we talk about the achievement gap, and it's very real in this district, and it's very real for certain subpopulations within specific geographies, and I would say that needs another look. When I saw the concentration of African American students that showed up repeatedly on a number of these IR campuses, it was very telling. And that's one area that this district in aggregate has not been able to really tack the problem at the source. And for these schools, especially the ones that are new to IR, this should become something of great importance to us as we move forward this year. So from the plans perspective, and I appreciate what has to go to TEA, but I also know that there's more to the story, and I do hope this board will be given good insight and perspective about what works, why, and how we improve the schools. And I want to personally say that with respect to the one school in District 1 left, which is Edward Carey Middle School, I'm very proud of the way that community has come together this year, and appreciative of the support. But, you know, it does take a lot of resources, coordinated, working effectively, not just in the classroom, not just in the community, but pulling the entirety of the community around supporting these campuses and these high-risk students. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Dr. Blackburn?
So as you look at all these 42, 43 schools and the concerns that they have, what common theme do you see that seem to be cropping up amongst all 43 of them? Or is there a common theme?
I do, Dr. Blackburn, I think we tried to call out some of those, you know, in the presentation, but I would say that one of the, you know, I mean, it just seems so obvious, but the main thing is making sure that there is a knowledge base around what is expected to be taught, the TEKs themselves, and making sure there's purposeful, aligned instruction, and kids are highly engaged when teachers are teaching. So making sure that the instruction matches the TEKs, making sure the students are engaged in that instruction. Those seem to be some of the key themes that came out of the conversations that assistant superintendents, executive directors, and principals had as they were preparing the plans.
So you're saying that amongst these 43 schools, they were not teaching the TEKs?
I'm saying that the focus and the key attention, very specific attention being on exactly what it is that students need to learn is something that I think the campuses are going to work on.
And if I might add, it's similar to that. It's the quality of instruction. And one of the ways we can tell that that's a focus of the campuses, when we had our short meetings with each of the IR schools, we asked them, you know, what did they need in order to turn around? This is while they were developing their plans for TEA. A lot of, many of them asked for instructional coaches or additional help from instructional coaches on various aspects of teaching. And so it does come down to that, but it also comes down to rigor. We notice a lot of that, expectations. And so some of the basic things we've been working on are the things that they need help with.
So the things we've been working on, these 43 schools still need help on.
Yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. We have several of them that this is their fourth year. Did I see that?
Three.
Two of them.
There are
three. Of them
three.
is their fourth year.
Sir.
So What are we doing different for the 4-year, the 3-year versus 2-year versus the 1 year? I guess I'm trying to tell you, what's the plan to improve? I can tell you, I don't think adding new coaches is going to do the job.
Well, every school is a little bit different. For example, Samuel's been on there, but Samuel is moving in the right direction. They've been improving, and they have started early colleges. That's going to help. So that's, we can ask the assistant soups if you want, but that's specific to that school, and each of those schools we're trying to address, pretty specifically. Brown Middle School I can speak to. That has been a question of instruction. It has been a question of leadership and classroom management. Some basic things there. And yes, it continues to struggle, but it is moving in the right direction. It's just none of these campuses. All of these campuses are struggling because of a wide variety of things, not just the teacher in the classroom. There are challenges of poverty, challenges of language, and so it will not be a flip the switch kind of improvement plan. This is an improvement over the long haul, and so we're hopeful that they will get off, and we're trying to design our actions to fit the particular campus.
So when we say that it's going to be a long haul, that means that some of these schools are going to remain IR. They're not going to come off next year. So we probably anticipate at least the same number or nearly the same number, if not more, next year, because in the long haul, poverty is not going to change. In the long haul, 2 or 3 instructional coaches is probably not going to change. But I overly emphasize the long haul because I know that education, kids don't all of a sudden flip a switch and all of a sudden they learn. But I'll go to another point that Trustee Foreman was making about, I think she was making about teachers and about the leaders of those campuses. We talk often about our exemplary and progressing 3 principles. Have you guys given any thought to reassigning those exemplary principles? As much as I hate for them to leave Townview and other places, have you guys given any thought to reassigning your exemplary principles to the most neediest schools and taking some of those, what are the teachers, the highest level teachers you're talking about? Distinguished teachers, and reassign them to our most neediest schools, the IR4s, the IR3s. Have we given any thought to that?
Yes, sir. We actually have given it a lot of thought, and there's been a lot of conversations with our principals, principal focus group, but principals on the whole. And as a group, they are loath and we are loath to insist on a principal moving to a school. Just because a principal is exemplary or distinguished in one school doesn't necessarily translate, and we've learned that the hard way. But also, if you force somebody to go to school, it doesn't always work out. But as a compromise, we are incentivizing principals to go to IR schools. So the new principal evaluation system, we just got the effectiveness ratings this year. So we, night before last, we celebrated 6 exemplary principals and 14 proficient 3 principals at the principal distinguished principal celebration. If you work in a tier 1 school or volunteer to go to tier 1 school, you get a stipend for that. So that's how we're trying to move in the direction of getting our, which I think is the point, most effective principals to our most struggling campuses.
Let me ask it this way. Have you guys talked to those principals about going to another school? Directly talk to them about going to another school?
Yes, we do that often. In fact, there's several principals who are in tier 1 schools today that we asked to go.
I'll tell you what, I will talk to the principals at Townview and ask them directly will they go to one of the other schools, because I have a feeling you guys have not talked to them directly one-on-one, and the man and the woman. Say, will you consider going to another school? You are a great principal at Townview. Will you consider going to Roger Q. Mills or Elijah M. Peace or somewhere where we really need your skills, because you're exemplary. I have the feeling from the comments that I'm receiving, you guys haven't had that one-on-one conversation. it's nice to have the incentive out there, but I can tell you, if I was the principal of Townview, I wouldn't give it a thought. I'd stay right where I was because it's easier. It is easier. I mean, you got a lot of brainy kids over there, but it's easier. So I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But on page 5, you need to be sure and spell the Zumwalt. It does not have a D.
And Douglas has 2 S's.
So noted. I apologize for that.
Spell check.
Spell check, correct.
Hey, Dr. Blackburn, Trustee Bingham, sorry.
Senior
How do you
moment.
spell that for me?
Moment.
Okay, so
Only one M on the end. First off, I am really glad that we're doing follow-up for the year after on the schools who go off the list, because I think that's pretty critical, because we don't want them to regress or slide down. So thank you for doing that. On our instructional coaches, and how many years in the classroom do they have to have before they can go for an instructional coach? Is there a time frame? Like, do they have to have 3 years, 5 years?
We didn't require a particular number, but we do have a very rigorous and specific instructional coach hiring process in which teaching and learning and school leadership and HCM all take a look at the skills that person brings to the table to be an instructional coach.
What about on the assessment? How effective are these academic coaches? Is there a separate evaluation for them? Like, we've got the new assessment for the principals and for the teachers. What about the academic coaches and the counselors? We've got a whole slew of folks in there, but right now the academic people seem to be...
Yeah. Those the coaches don't have a particular evaluation. The counselors were working on an evaluation for them, but the coaches not at this time.
Are the principals participating, or the EDs or the assistant supes participating in what we can do for an assessment for those academic coaches?
As I said, we'll have to work on that one, but they will, of course, be a part of that conversation.
So how, like, for say next year, how far out are we?
How soon?
Well, right now we're finishing up the AP assistant principal evaluation, which we'll bring to the board in the first week of January, and then we're finishing up we've already finished the ED eval, but the final draft will be done, and we will start looking at instructional coaches this summer and early next year.
Earlier I heard something about the achievement gap, and Superintendent Miles, I was under the impression that, yes, there's still obviously an achievement gap, but it's my impression that that's on an upward trajectory, or have I been looked at something wrong? Could you just talk about that a little?
Yeah, the achievement gap has been actually fairly, closing the gap has been very difficult over years. Not last year, but the year before, we narrowed the gap a little bit in reading and math. And this year, the reading gap did grow a little bit. And so it's a mixed picture. Overall, we've narrowed the gap, I think, one percentage point if you count all subjects. So it's flat. I mean, you can say 1%, over 10 years means 10%, but I think the best case we can say right now is we haven't narrowed the gap that much over the last 2 years, but neither had we prior to that either. And so we're going to keep working on that. We know that's one area. One thing the board, I hope, recognize with regard to how our minority students achieve, and remember 95% of our students are minority, on the AP exam, our minority students in math, science, and English outscored all other minority students in the other urban districts in the United States by a 2-to-1 margin on the number of students, percentage of students passing with a 3, 4, or 5. Sometimes we hear that our kids can't achieve, but that's a big piece of evidence that they can achieve, and that some of the things that our teachers are doing are working fairly well. So AP classes, AP teachers, and the higher expectations for our minority students in that regard, we outpace Houston, New York, LA, doesn't matter, by a 2-to-1 margin.
Thank you, Superintendent Miles. On the assessments, we were talking about there's going to be more assessments, because a lot of times what I hear is there's too much assessment in the classrooms. Please reassure me, these are not things that take up tremendous amount of time.
And I can reassure you on that. These are not district-created assessments. For the most part, they would be, in my head, the way they would normally work is you've taught some math lessons around a certain theme, and you give the kids 3 or 4 problems to work to see if they get it. So that's the kind of assessment we're talking about. Do they understand the concept? And if so, move on.
I'd like to add, because we've had lots of discussion this semester already and in the last couple of years. The district gives a mid-year exam called an ACP, and it also gives an end-of-a-year exam, also ACP, second semester ACP. The only other assessments that are required at a district level besides the state-required exams are those exams that we do for all kids, like the SAT at the junior level, and those exams required for placement at magnet or Vanguard schools. All the other exams you hear about, the unit exams, the 6-week exams, the 9-week exams, those are all up to the building principal. And if that's not the case, the building principal can call me, because we don't want the EDs or assistant students dictating exams, and so it's really down to the principal how many exams there are, apart from the big ones I just mentioned.
So is there a balance, though? Because sometimes in messaging, it doesn't get across, or it gets lost. And for instance, I'll give lesson plans. I've heard from various teachers they were spending like 5 and 6 hours a week on lesson plans because Mr. Miles said that that's what we're supposed to do. And somewhere between here and in the classroom, the messaging was lost. And it's not, lesson plans shouldn't take over, 15, 30 minutes a week?
Yeah, that's another area we've heard a lot about. You're absolutely right. That sometimes it gets lost in translation.
Before we start getting...
Oh, sorry.
Let's stick
Well,
to
I mean,
that.
I'm just saying that there should be a
there's a point that you're
messaging
making.
on the assessments, because we
So
could
the messaging
have
component's critical.
we could have principals saying, "Look, we want all this testing, and it's really not that necessary."
Really, most of the time should be spent on instruction and good, high-quality, purposeful instruction. Assessments should take up a little bit just to make sure you're still on track.
All right. Also, and I've just got 3 or 4 more questions. I noticed that a lot of the schools that are really doing quite well, they have data rooms, just a room set aside, and they've got walls of data set up. In these IR schools, are we encouraging them to just have it where it's all visible, or is that just up to a principal? Or?
Yes, ma'am. No, that is an expectation at the district level. The assistant superintendents and the EDs are working with the campuses to think about what kinds of data they want, making sure there's a place within the school that data can be displayed, and not just displayed, but actually studied and used and looked at, and try to make decisions about where we need to go from there. So that's district-wide.
Okay. And then when it comes to technology, in the IR schools, do we have robust technology in these IR schools? And I know we can have the technology, but we also need the programs. In fact, one program I saw just a week or so ago was Accelerated Reader, which I think is a wonderful program, and I don't work for Accelerated Reader. But that's just one example of some robust software technology. But are they getting what they need?
Well, as you heard the superintendent say a moment ago, we did hear a presentation from each of the the principals of an IR campus, and they asked for various kinds of things. Some of them did ask for technology, and we're working towards trying to provide those things that they asked for. We have some federal funding that we've already put towards the IR schools, and so we will continue to monitor that and see if there are other needs.
And if I might add, that is an area we need to grow in. We've done a great job, the technology department, in putting the infrastructure in, and you've heard me say that, including at the IR schools. The bandwidth is greater, the wireless environment is greater, but for sure we need to do more with the hardware when it comes to the number of cows.
Computers on wheels.
Computers on wheels, cows, and laptops and smart boards, no question. And so some of the IR schools have asked, and we're helping with that.
And on the technology, because to me technology is just always changing. What kind of turnover? In other words, every 3 years do we update? Every 5 years do we update? What is the cycle on that? Or
Great.
I don't want to give you a number that's wrong. Can we get that to you?
Okay, and then my last point has to do with principals, new principals and new teachers. I love new principals, I love new teachers. Sometimes those brand new teachers have the absolute most zeal and energy that you can possibly imagine. I've got 3 little cousins who just started teaching within the last 3 years, and they could teach circles around me in my latter years. So I think new teachers are good. Of course, we have to monitor them, because I think a really good principal can figure out probably within a week if this teacher is going to make it or not make it, or at least be able to step in and start giving them the extra help that they need. When it comes to principals, some of the new principals, sometimes it's a good fit in an area, sometimes it's not, but sometimes that new energy can, to me, a successful school, all you have to do is look at where that principal is, the guidance from a new principal. A principal can absolutely make or break a school. They can run off a faculty, they can invigorate a faculty, they can do great things for a school, or they can absolutely run it into the ground, depending on what their technique is. So I don't want us to start beating up too much on new teachers and new principals, because I think that they do have a great energy there. And so new principals, new teachers, that doesn't concern me too much. So, sometimes, I know, Dr. Blackburn, you were talking about the magnet school principals. Sometimes the skill set is a lot different for a magnet school than it is for the comprehensive schools. So just because they're great at a magnet school might not carry over to another. So I think we need to just be careful. Different skill set. And that's all. Thank you.
Trustee Bingham. Trustee Nuttall.
Hi. We received our waiver right to waive us from.
The state of Texas received a waiver.
Yes, so
that's
we don't
right.
have to.
That's correct.
Federal AYP and all of that.
State doesn't.
We don't. Okay. I just wanted, because I know some
Right.
campuses. Mm-hmm. My question, can you talk about reconstitution? The schools that are under reconstitution?
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yes. Is there anything particular you wanted? I mean,
How many
an
schools
IR, there are
gonna have
14
to
of them.
reconstitute?
There are 14 of them.
And when are we going to have the plan present to the board? Because normally you will present at this time. Last year, when I looked at last year's presentation, we discussed the reconstitution of our schools.
The format this year from the state is that I'm to bring that to the board in April. The state has added additional components other than the one that you're most familiar with is the reconstitution of staff. The state has added 8 additional components to that, and so IR2 campuses are to develop a plan that addresses not only the reconstitution of staff, but also things with regard to finance, with regard to educational reforms on the campus, everything. There's a list of 8 areas that they have. And so those will be discussed in April, and those plans are currently in the works of being developed.
And you said there are 14 campuses?
14.
And can you clarify for people the IR2 status? That's if you IR the second time
year.
in 2 years, correct? You said IR2.
IR2 meaning that this is the second year you've been in IR status.
And so how many campuses? 14 campuses
14
again?
that are in the second year of improvement required.
And do we have any plans already for the reconstitution? Have we been working on any plans?
Yes, we have.
Is there any way you can share those plans with the board so we don't have to in April? We have to make a vote on that, correct?
In April.
So is there any way
I can certainly keep you informed as those plans are developed through your Friday reports. And
Miles, I'm requesting a formal request that we're kept in the loop, especially, and can you tell us the requirement? You said there are 8 that now used to be just reconstituted the staff. Now there are other areas to consider in reconstitution. Can you just put all that in our Friday package?
Sure.
I'm requesting
Certainly.
a copy of where you are to date on. That's going to impact a lot of schools that when you reconstitute them, correct? In a lot of neighborhoods, am I correct? So I'm requesting, so that on the reconstitution.
ma'am.
14 campuses.
Right. I will, and I will give you those areas because there are 8 additional
Yeah, they
ones.
changed, they added additional.
They're additional ones.
Yeah.
It's,
You can just give us the board a copy. So
okay, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question just to make sure? So, can you have that for us on this Friday packet? I just want to make sure we know when to receive it.
Or do you need a week to pull it together?
I can pull something briefly together on that. If you're talking about the 8 components, I can certainly do that. And
Something had to be submitted to the state, am I correct, on reconstitution of?
No, not yet.
We didn't sign anything yet to be submitted to the state?
nothing is submitted to the state on reconstitution until April.
Until April. But, we're in the works now of discussing reconstitution.
In fact, I actually have a memo that Dr. Smisko and I have been working on that is due out actually in next Friday's packet. I just didn't want to put them all together in one packet with the plans, but I can send out that if you would like earlier, and be happy to send that along with the 8 components.
I think as a trustee, and it's going to impact communities, and there are additional items that you can consider in reconstitution. I think we need to be abreast of that.
I will do that in tomorrow's packet.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
My next question is when I look at the TEA report, and you go to page 3 of 10, teacher quality, because we're talking about IR campuses. But let me back to the IR campuses and looking at the data as trustee Elizabeth Jones talked about. And I guess my concern is that we have 9 high schools that are IR required. And when you look at and we have Roosevelt, Conrad, Sock, Samuel, Spruce, Carter, Lincoln, Pinkston, and Wilmer Hutchins that are IR required. And so when you look at that and you look at the potential of how many of them have not passed at least one EO exam, what are we doing to help our students that are in IR schools that are high school? What kind of intervention, how are we helping those students? I looked at the plan, it was kind of like a checklist, it was kind of, but what are we doing about those students? Because it's 9 high schools are in IR status, and by the state of Texas, you have to pass 5 EOC to graduate, and 26.6% of our seniors have flunked at least one EOC exam. Exactly 1,954 of them failed at least
1,956, right?
54.
Okay, 54, wonderful. Two just passed. No.
2 just passed? Okay. I thought they took it in December.
Oh, no, December is our next opportunity. So, but we do.
26.6% of our seniors and
Still have
they're
to
in
pass at
IR
least one
campuses.
test.
So on
That's
top
correct.
of being an IR campus,
There's kids.
still have to pass the test.
No, you're right.
And so when you also back and look at the Title I funding and some of the Title I funding that we've taken, we've put in administration, I'm just concerned about how campuses in high school level are helping our kids have the best academic outcome.
Obviously, that's the goal. But to the EOC issue, that is a specific goal for us across the district, is that every senior, every senior graduates this on time, and that means they will have passed all their EOC exams. So there's a couple of things that high schools are doing, and some individual high schools may have even more, but each high school does have to have a plan for the seniors, this year's seniors, for making sure that they, individually, they need to know exactly who the students are that still need to pass exams. They need to have them in some kind of intervention program. It might be tutoring. If the students can come before and after school, that's what it would be. We also have local credit courses that students can be placed into, so that they'll have a period during the day where there's an intervention to help you pass that end of course exam. The teaching, Vincent Reyes and the Teaching and Learning Department have created some materials that teachers can use to help students that still need to pass their end of course exam. And so, there's 5 of them. There's English 1 and 2, and then biology, algebra, and social studies. And in the past it wasn't this way, but the English 2 is the one that's the most commonly, needed exam. So we
financial resources, Superintendent Mouse, to help them for that. Give them extra resources and not, is the IR
Schools,
schools receiving?
they're IR schools and they do receive extra resources.
receiving
Yes,
extra
ma'am.
resources to be able to help them?
Yeah, the
Extra money?
federal money,
For the
yes.
principal to decide?
That's right. Yes.
My next question is, I looked at the disc on there, O.M. Roberts belonged to Miguel. They had District 9, Lincoln, Dade, Burleson, Douglas, and O.M. Roberts. So if you was looking for O.M. Roberts, it was under District 9. I didn't know if you was looking for their plan. But I had a question about Billy Earl Dade. Can you tell me what index caused Dade to be an IR campus this year?
It was index 1, 3, and 4.
Can you tell the 1, 3, and 4?
1 was student achievement, 3 is closing the performance gaps, and 4 was post-secondary readiness.
Lincoln, can you tell me which indexes for Lincoln?
Lincoln was just 4.
Burleson?
What?
Burleson?
Burleson was 1, 2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, and 4. And Douglas?
Douglas,
Just so you're saying 1. Just index 1, Dr. Oakley?
Douglas is just index 1. I try to look at the plan and look at the index from the school. Thank you for the school profiles, Dr. Oakley, that whole. I was trying to figure out what part is aligned to improve those indexes. So.
The plans?
Yeah, on the plans. When I was.
I won't be able to call the specific section of the plan, but every one of them has a part where it talks about academic improvement, where you're going to improve, how you're going to improve academics.
Like
Chuck,
at
you
Dade,
probably
for
know
example,
those better.
reading is a reading.
Right,
is an
reading is
issue.
one of the areas.
So how are we? I didn't see specifically how are we targeting for academic achievement in, like 1 is Dade, Burleson, and Douglas, which is.
index 1 has an effect upon the remaining indexes. Index 1, if you improve student achievement, you're basically improving the performance gaps or closing them, as well as post-secondary readiness, primarily because in the calculation of those indexes, it is based on passing the test in a comparison to a higher standard that the state has put out. If you think about it in terms of 4 columns, we are in the first column. There's phase 1, 2, and 3. And they compare it to phase 4, which is where the state wants the schools to be in the state. We're only in the first phase, and what these other indexes that they're missing, in fact, primarily when you talk of high schools, what really got the high schools into the IR status this year is because after the test had been given, the state announced that what they were doing is comparing the test to also a higher standard, which again was 4 columns up, or 3 columns between 1 and 4. And our campuses did not reach those higher standards. And so I hope you see that overall.
When I looked at it, and I guess what I'm trying to understand, Dr. Charles, is I see student achievement as an index 1 on a lot of the campuses. And then I look at the annual goal, 100% of the staff will be given training to understand the curriculum, unpack the teaks, and become proficient in utilizing the resources in Curriculum Central. And then when you look back, I mean, I'm trying to just understand how is all of that. What is the problem with student achievement? 100% of the staff will be given training to understand the curriculum. It just seems to me that we should already be understanding the curriculum. This is an IR school, so where are we? Is it understanding that reading is their problem? I looked at the data, and reading, social studies, and science was the issue at Billy Earl Dade, and they had double digits of that when you look at the data.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand, is this a more behind another plan that's more detailed to understand how we're going to help kids for academic achievement? Or just, because it's very general to me.
Well, yes, it's general in that sense, but if you think about what does it take for a student to really learn to read at the standard that we expect them to read, in the plan there, what they're saying is, let's make sure our teachers have the knowledge and skills to be able to really understand the TEKS, make sure that they have good strategies for helping students to learn, and then make sure that they're able to sort of progress check to make sure kids are moving along. So when they're talking about professional development for the teachers, it's just, I think, the way I read that is that just to make sure that the teachers are very clear and coached and supported in teaching reading well.
Okay, I was just trying to match this, but there's a deeper plan.
Yeah.
Because if you look, math, all students was a negative 13.1%. So we have math, and then I look at reading. So I was just trying to understand how we're helping kids. And
Helping
then when
kids
you
by
read the
making sure
TEA,
teachers are well prepared.
When you read the TEA, that was one of the agency team learned through staff interviews and IR campus principals meetings that quality, capacity, and retention of teachers hired was one of the greatest challenges their campus faced in improving student performance. Principals was concerned that the pool of teachers available hired lacked instructional knowledge and the ability to analyze data. That was what TEA discovered when they visit us. So I'm just trying to understand how we are helping kids be successful on that part. And that was just, I think that was the TEA, IR, and Constitution to me.
Trustee Cowan?
There is reconstitution information in this disc that you gave us.
Reconstitution was part of the tab that is at the bottom of the disc, primarily because the state puts all of the forms on there. We're only today looking at the improvement plans. Some of the campuses have begun their reconstitution plans. They are not complete in there. But what you have that's going to the state is the tab for improvement plans.
I want to reiterate, and not beat a dead horse, but reiterate what Trustee Mitchke and Trustee Jones touched on, and they talked about differentiating teachers in schools. We need to have a conversation at some point this year about how we differentiate how we treat our campuses. 20% of our schools are IR. We shouldn't be treating 80% like they are IR, and we should be giving autonomy and flexibility to the campuses that are performing well. What I am also hearing is that we are being pressured and treated like we are failing when we are in fact succeeding. And that is a conversation we need to have. We have talked, since I've been on the board, about earned empowerment, about letting principals be the managers of their schools. But when we are applying pressure from the top down in terms of instructional quality, expectations, we want to make sure that that message is sent to the proper schools and that our attention is focused on what I see as repeat offenders for years. Schools that have not improved for years. And what are we doing about to fix those schools? The resources we're giving to those schools, the pressure we're applying to those schools without alienating our good schools.
If I may,
Yeah.
I think more differentiation is needed, and it's going to come, and more autonomy. We have this discussion all the time, and more is going to come. I would want to put a big footnote on that, though. We don't have a college-ready rate in almost every comprehensive high school yet, above 10%. We don't have an ACT above 21. Our average ACT in the district is 17.6. So yes, we have some of the best magnet schools, and we probably should leave them alone, which, for the most part we are. But almost all of our schools can do better by our kids, and they need to raise the expectations. Now, that doesn't mean we should have heavy-handed direction, and trust me, we have had that conversation over and over again in the last 2 months and several times in the last 2 years. But especially in the last 2 months, if you ask the EDs and principals, assistant supes, and APs last week on October 29th, they will testify that the message from this office and administration is that you cannot get out on the field and throw the ball for the principal. The principal runs the schools. They're the ones who say what resources. They're the ones who say what types of strategies. They're the ones who say how much recess. They're the ones who say, what type of teachers they pick, et cetera, and how many assessments there are. So we are giving autonomy. In fact, just to give you one example, not to belabor it, but I got asked just day before yesterday by an assistant sup, or was told how they're implementing this defined autonomy. There's a principal of a school that's not an IR school, and that principal wants to try a program, not a curriculum, because the curriculum's at TEKS. They have to teach the Texas standards, but they want to try a reading program that we don't think it will be that successful. And I told the assistant sup, you let that principal do what they want. Because in the end of the day, they're accountable, so let them do it. And if they want to have assessments every 3 weeks, you let them do it, and then they'll be held accountable at the end if their scores go down. But if it works, then you leave them alone. So the message that you just said, Trustee Cowan, is very similar to the message we're saying, with the defined part maybe added to the autonomy.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
I want to talk about reconstitutions for just a bit. You indicated that there's a reconstitution plan that's going to be submitted to TEA in April. Is that right?
We're going to submit the plan to you in April.
For approval, right.
And the reconstitution list is a subset of this entire list of IR schools. There's 14 of them.
If you are IR2 in the second year, you're required to go through reconstitution. And on the multi-year, there are 14 of them.
So only the IR2, but not the IR3 and IR4, because we have two IR.
Already gone through that process.
Okay, so then that brings me to the questions about what is reconstitution. So there's now 8 additional reconstitution options, not
options.
That's criteria for selection.
No.
Where is that? Here it is.
In addition to staff changes, they have to have a plan to read them out to you there, to provide how are you going to provide high expectation for students and so forth and so forth.
So the reconstitution options then are still fundamentally the same reconstitution options that have been defined in statute. I want to quickly summarize my understanding of those options, and you tell me whether I'm correct or not correct. Because some of the reconstitution options strike me as pretty serious, like the school gets closed. And some of them strike me as not very serious at all, like we're reconstituted. Is that an accurate summary of the option range?
Not quite.
Okay.
IR2 is the process of how it works, is that when you're in IR2, you go through the process of mainly reconstituting staff, or look at the staff and asking the question, who on this campus is impeding the progress of moving the school on? And if they are if the ED and the PSP decide that they need to go, then the district either moves them or they're terminated or non-renewed.
Which is really no different than every other campus in the state of Texas.
The only difference is that when they become to the third status, the third year, the commissioner at a public hearing down in Austin, the main reason they go to that hearing is basically they want to know what happened during reconstitution. How is your school doing? Did it work? Do you have a better staff? And I do know that on November 20th, in the morning, our IR4 campuses are having a teleconference with TEA officials. Again, TEA is asking those 3 campuses, how did reconstitution, what happened, is it still working, how are you doing, are you doing well? In other words, every year the commissioner keeps asking, are you improving? What are you doing differently?
Let me then clarify we're reconstituted. You got to do that and then survive a series of questions by
the 6th year.
By a series of bureaucrats.
Can I add? Because I think I know where you might be moving. So let me just say this. I mean, there are different levels of reconstitution, and true reconstitution, at least from my experience and what I think the picture or what that word means, is that you do a systemic and sizable reconstitution, which often requires you to change out a number of teachers, maybe even most of the teachers, requires different leadership, perhaps different programmatic things. And it's similar to one or two other schools that we've reconstituted in the past, but not most of the reconstitution we do have been not much different than what we do in other places. So in other words, replacing a principal and 5 teachers is not much different than we do in many other cases that don't have to have that title.
Sure.
Reconstitution. So
Which is the reason for my clap. We're reconstituting.
No,
It's really no different
what
than
you
anything
meant.
else than what we're doing in all of our other campuses.
Right.
So the next question, and I apologize because I'm not as prepared as I wanted to be because there was an information request that got lost. Let me ask a couple of questions about 2 schools in particular, Blanton and Mills. They're the only elementary schools that we have that are beyond IR2. Are the principals at those 2 campuses today the same as they were the last year?
Yes.
Okay. And so if I'm comparing, let me ask then a different question. Were they the same last year as they were the year before last?
No. Stephanie, do you know?
Yes, sir. Both of those principals, this is their second year there.
This is their second year.
Yes, sir. So last year was their first full year, and this is their second year.
Okay. So, with the understanding that it takes a little while for a new sheriff to establish law and order, the improvements that I would expect to see at those 2 campuses would probably be in the second year of their new principalship.
And that is the expectation, and that's what we've already been observing the first couple of months at both of those schools. First year was really a focus on philosophy, core beliefs, getting the culture and climate around kids can. When you have a historical, continual lack of success, even good folks, we begin to feel like we can't do this. So we really had to spend a lot of time just kind of
realigning on the board.
and simplifying processes also.
So, these are the folks that are going to go down in November and testify in front of the commissioner?
It's a teleconference.
Yeah.
All right.
But they did go personally last year.
When I read the intervention plans for those 2 campuses in particular, there were a few things, and I understand that these plans are essentially a paperwork requirement, and the real plan is what the principals are actually doing. So I get that caveat. But both of these plans indicated sort of where they are today in terms of performance in various assessments and what they expect to see a 1-year goal to be. And they're about the same. I'm going to make a huge generalization. Today we're in the 40th. We're about 40% passing, and next year we're going to be at 80% passing. And I'm just curious to know whether that has ever happened in human history.
Yes, sir, it has.
Okay. We've seen a jump that large in 1 year at some of our campuses.
I don't know about any of our campuses. Have I ever had that experience? Yes, I have, personally.
Okay.
However, part of that has to do with the tiering of students. So while you have 40% that may have only met that standard, if you have another 30% that are this far from meeting that gap, then you have another group that need 2 years, then you continue to tier the students. So it's not possible on every campus, but in this particular set where we've done the data analysis with the teachers, it is possible. That's not a goal we've just set out in the air.
We think that's an actual sort of realistic, perhaps a realistic stretch goal, but realistic.
Absolutely. I mean,
Attainable
we're
goal.
absolutely, we're tapping the ceiling, but yes, we do think it's attainable.
Tapping?
Okay, well, I guess I'll be interested in seeing how that works out then next year. A question for the administration in terms of the options that we've discussed with regard to the reconstitution plans. And these kinds of options aren't necessarily available universally just because of physical capacity issues. But we have had in the district's history, to my knowledge, 3 cases where we shuttered low-performing campuses and reconstituted them in a completely different fashion. And the three campuses that come to mind are Spruce, Amasio Smith, and it's an elementary school that's still closed in West Dallas. Dr. Blackburn, you might need to remind me. They went to Carver, Sequoia. And so I looked at the outcomes reports from each of those reconstitutions. And unfortunately, the Amasio Smith outcomes report doesn't really exist, but I can see where Amasio Smith is today versus where it was. And I looked at the outcomes reports for Spruce and for Sequoia. And in both cases, when we tracked where the kids went the following year, they did better in their new environment. So I think Sequoia, they went to Carver, and at Spruce, they went to a combination of Lincoln and Madison. And so we saw not major, but improvements in the students that were affected by that. And then we saw extraordinarily major improvements in the new campuses. I think there was a 25 percentage point gain at Spruce, and Amasio Smith's probably one of the top 50 high schools in state Texas today. Now, Smith in particular is very different than it used to be. And so this is a very long question, but it is, are we considering this as an option, which for Mills in particular, because of the availability of capacity at nearby campuses, would be a particularly compelling option, and you could reconstitute that as one of the transformation campuses with a Montessori program or a specialized academic focus, very similar to what we did at BF Darrell and which is now Obama, where you have some kids that are zoned for the neighborhood and some kids that are there, but you have a school that took a year and a half to build the new campus, and we built it right from the get-go, and there was a massive transformational change in outcomes at those campuses, Amasio Smith, Rangel, Obama, and I'm just wondering if that is in the conversation with regard to these campuses that are IR2, perhaps not, since it sounds like they're not in the conversation for Blanton and Mills because you kind of like the plan that you're on. But this is a very different than, say, just an iterative improvement of a few staff members. So I'm just wondering, is that part of our toolbox?
I would say there's 2 things to consider. The general answer is yes, but let me be specific. One, I think with school choice, you're going to see if we were to build new schools or if we were to repurpose a school, it'll be more transformative and more reconstituted. I think that will depend on the situation, who applies, which area applies, because we're doing an application process. With reconstitution, the more serious type, where we don't close the school, but we just have everybody reapply and start with the new staff, new programming, and all that in an existing structure. I think that we will consider at the end of the year, but we won't be able to entertain more than a couple. Just because of the intensity of need that a reconstitution of that order takes. Even a partial reconstitution of schools is pretty traumatic, sometimes to the community, sometimes to staff, and so we will be much more deliberate if we do it that way.
So, just to continue that question then, in the reconstitution plans that were presented, the 14 reconstitution plans that were presented in April, do you anticipate that any one of those 14 plans will be along the lines of what I just described?
Coming April?
Yes.
I want to reserve judgment. I think yes is the answer again too. We'll look closely at a couple of those schools that we think may need a wholesale, that's what you're talking about, transformation.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Morath. I guess final questions on the topic. There are a few schools on here that I know have very particular issues as it relates to churn in students. So I know Kennedy and Ray are in the same general vicinity, and in that vicinity you have a very high population of homeless children. Same can be said for well, those schools in particular, and then with Roberts, I know you have a disciplinary unit that is in that school, and so you've got kids that are coming in and out pretty regularly. So what are we doing? What are those schools in particular doing to try to, mitigate the academic issues that may come with that, and then what types of plans do the administration maybe have when you have schools that have those particular issues? You don't have to give me the very specifics of each of those schools, but is there just a general plan to say in situations where we have extreme circumstances, what are we doing?
Well, Stephanie's coming up there. One of the things we did to try to mitigate that a little bit is to make sure that we don't overly concentrate struggling students or kids who, for example, have IEP. That's a huge behavioral issue in one campus. I know we did that a couple of years ago, but this year you'll see that more spread out, so you don't have an overconcentration. That's just one thing. But Stephanie, go ahead if there's.
Obviously, OM Roberts is not one of my schools, but I do have other schools that are in similar situations, like Hotchkiss, which is in Trustee Mischke's, has the same thing with units. It's also IR at this time. And so we work with Angela Pittman in special education as we look at where those units are and if they're going to create, because we know some of those units, those classrooms require a lot of attention from administration for support. So if it's going to be a distractor from the main thing at that particular campus, and we know we have a lot of needs for those students, we want to meet all the students' needs. So we work with them on what's a neighboring school that would be a better fit for some of those units. And that's all done at leveling when we're working with Budget and Carmen's group in terms of where are those particular classrooms going. We first always want to meet the needs of the students, obviously, in terms of how long they're on the bus, what's the transportation issue, and the facilities at those locations, because we also want to ensure we have the right support facilities.
The other question then is, to stay along the same line of unique situations, when I think about a school like Dade or a school like Hernandez, where you've had multiple campuses merged into one campus, that also brings with it particular situations. So again, I know I maybe can't get into the specifics of each of those plans, but how is the administration going to try to work with those particular schools, because both of those schools are improvement required 2 right now?
I think one of those does belong to assistant superintendent's office.
Thanks.
And I do want to speak to Kennedy and Ray, since you asked about that. Kennedy, that was a campus. We did have a lot of students that were identified for special education support. And so what the principal did request is an additional assistant principal this year. And so we went ahead and accommodated that. And for J.W. Ray, we did have several units that were assigned to that campus. And so last year they actually made the move. They went ahead and moved some of those units to a campus that was not low performing. And so that principal has also requested an additional assistant principal this year, and we've accommodated that for her as well. Okay? So,
could the person that, because you mentioned Dade and asked about, is the assistant soup here for Billy or Dade, so they can give us the opportunity to answer that question as well?
Yeah, she's not, but we can get information if you have additional questions.
So I want to just, what I'll do is, if you can mark that and make sure that all trustees have that information.
Absolutely.
yes, and then your other question regarding Hernandez Elementary, where they've been merged, I think a lot of the work that has taken place there is a lot of, with the guidance, with a lot of the counseling, a lot of the working with the community to make certain that we are accommodating those students' needs. But you did mention 3 of those campuses that are in Division 3, and I know that the ED is working very closely with each of those principals to make certain that those particular components are addressed. And as their principals are requesting for support and assistance, we're making certain that we're making the necessary moves to do that.
Very much.
Okay.
You have?
Well, I had one question to pivot off of you, if that's all right.
Sure, you can.
The discipline issue shows up pretty consistently across a lot of these schools. They're high discipline campuses, discipline problem campuses. Can you talk a minute about where that comes into kind of the planning and the types of things that are done to support or deal with those related considerations?
I could speak a little to that. I know that last year, actually in years past, there has been a lot of emphasis with the personal behavior support planning, and so there were cohorts selected last year, and this year we're actually working with student support services to make certain that we've identified more campuses that could benefit from these support services. In fact, they've already started the planning, they're already starting the training that'll take place the beginning of December. So there's several campuses that have been identified for that, and there are several of the campuses that we've talked about here this morning that have been selected for those.
There's a consistent pattern. I was just doing some of that cross-analytic, and you see it, that these are some of our highest discipline-related.
You may remember last year, towards the end of the year, Sherry West gave a presentation about that whole issue of the discipline issues and what we were doing this year, and all of those things that she talked about with the working with making sure that even in school suspension, there's real teaching going on, making sure there's positive behavior support throughout the campus. And to Dr. Mark Servias' comments, that you can see it on the ground in some of the schools that need the most help.
So, final question, and then we'll wrap up this conversation because we've got early childhood directly after. It was mentioned this idea of trying to potentially incentivize principals to go to IR schools. Is the same effort being made with assistant principals?
Yes, the assistant principal, the draft of their evaluation plan has the same stipends as the principals. And that's one of the 3 stipends.
So that would be moving forward, so potentially next year.
Moving forward,
Okay.
yes, sir.
And then we're going to wrap this up.
I looked at the 43 IR schools. One of the common threads is, what was the greatest decrease in student academic achievement in the areas? Because a lot of them had 1 index, the number 1. So what was the greatest common?
I'm sorry, are you...
In the 43 IR schools.
What was the greatest? You mean like reading? You mean like which area?
Yeah, which area decreased?
Well, in general, reading has been our problem in the district, and in these schools, it's the same.
So it was reading.
Reading.
What would you say the greatest student achievement area after that? It was reading and then?
Writing, yeah.
It was writing?
Reading and writing are the 2.
Did you say?
Yes, Dr.
Reading, writing. And I would like to know the 3rd area that they're struggling with. Reading, writing, and then the 3rd area.
Probably math. Dr. Oakley, would you agree?
Yeah.
Reading, writing, math.
Science was a big area.
It was reading, writing, and you say science?
I'm looking at the campuses that I work with, and so we did talk a lot about science this year.
Yeah.
You know, you'll say science, Dr. Smisco?
I would agree, yeah.
Okay,
Science
so
and
reading,
math.
writing, science is the greatest academic achievement area. Okay.
Thank you all very much. These we're now on to item B, Destination 2020 Early Childhood Plan.
I'll check next time.
Thank you, Trustee Solis, members of the board. Alan COWAN has been doing a great job with planning and helping us with early childhood, and the registrations for preschool is going to give us an overview of our early childhood plan.
I'll go get it.
Okay, Faye.
Good afternoon. Today, only 38% of DISD kindergartners start the year kindergarten ready. This is important for 2 reasons. First, for the individual student, kindergarten readiness is an extremely powerful predictor of future academic success. But second, in aggregate, our District K readiness rate creates an artificial brick ceiling for all subsequent student achievement rates. Simply put, having more than 60% of our students begin the K-12 pipeline already in need of remediation is not a recipe for the lifelong success of our children. That's why we need to focus on the metric of kindergarten readiness. And that's why a key goal of our district's Destination 2020 transformation is to dramatically increase our kindergarten readiness rate by focusing on 4 key levers. First, we must improve our pre-K access, or the availability of seats for eligible 3 and 4-year-old students. Second, once we have the classroom space, we need to improve parent and caregiver demand for pre-K so that we're reaching children that are in need of early intervention and instruction. Third, we must make large investments in improving the quality of our pre-K program so that our students can realize the benefits proven by over 40 years of research of a high-quality pre-K education. And last, we must work closely with a broad coalition of community stakeholders to extend the continuum of care, both horizontally and vertically, so that our students receive quality educational experiences that extend beyond the classroom and as early as birth. As we discussed last month, a student that attends DISD pre-K is approximately 350% more likely to be kindergarten ready than a student that does not attend DISD pre-K. So the focus on access and demand can immediately have a meaningful impact on children. But today, our infrastructure is insufficient. If 100% of eligible 4-year-olds showed up for the first day of school, 2,700 students would not have a seat available within their attendance zone. 2,700. Also, expected population shifts over the next several years will exacerbate the misalignment between where children live and where the seats are available. If we do not act fast, instead of increasing enrollment, we could actually lose the increases in pre-K enrollment that we've made over the past 3 years. But even if we fix our infrastructure issues as a district, we will still need to improve the quality of our pre-K program. Despite the clear benefits of attending DISD pre-K, only 46% of students attending DISD pre-K today start kindergarten school ready. Now, that's a huge problem, but it also highlights that our greatest opportunity to make gains in kindergarten readiness come from improving the quality of our pre-K program. Now, there are an awful lot of places where we need to improve the quality of our pre-K program, but I would caution all of us to realize that there's no single silver bullet that will improve K readiness overnight. Change management of this scale and magnitude requires long-range planning. We need a comprehensive set of tactics that layer on top of one another as part of an overarching theory of change. And that's exactly how we've approached our high-level strategic planning for early childhood. We have a set of 30 distinct tactics that build upon one another to create a multiplying effect in terms of overall impact. Let me give you an example. So we know we have shortages across the entire state of Texas in terms of educators with specialized training in early childhood education. Separately, but as I'll show you connected, we want to capitalize on research showing the importance of frequent quality adult-child interactions in the early years. So we will look to lower our pre-K classroom ratios to 8-to-1 by adding an additional pre-K TA into each of our classrooms. By the time we have this plan in place for the entire district, we'll have more than 900 pre-K TAs throughout the district. Now think about that. Not only will we have 900 TAs helping the quality of the instruction in the classroom, but they will double as a grow our own pipeline for future high-quality pre-K teachers. We'll be able to look at who are our high-performing TAs within the pre-K classroom, pay them to go get certified, because who is better positioned to be a future high-quality, high-performing pre-K teacher than a high-performing pre-K TA that's already in our classrooms working with our curriculum, helping our students achieve. This is exactly how we move from isolated tactics to a strategic theory of change. So if you just look at this one slide, you're going to see this is an absolutely huge effort, and it would be a mistake to feel like an effort like this, the kindergarten readiness rate is going to move overnight. It's going to take many of these identified tactics being implemented and layered on top one of another in order to reach a tipping point necessary to see significant movement in K readiness. As a district and as a community, we need Dallas to have the discipline to stick with a strategic vision long enough to reach that tipping point. Now, the good news is we have a lot of early momentum around our Destination 2020 Early Childhood Initiative. So now it's time to grow some of our early success from just a nice moment into a comprehensive effort that genuinely has the potential to change lives.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Trustees, Trustee Foreman.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I have a few questions. And I'm going to start with the hard question. Because I like to say when you start talking about social issues, I'm very liberal. But when you start talking about finances, I'm very concerned. So you want or believe that we should employ 450 TAs.
Yes.
Where are we going to get that money?
So I think that, for us, what we focused on is what we were going to need in order to really make a dramatic change in terms of our kindergarten readiness rate. Now, each year, we will propose a budget for the subsequent year, but we're not proposing any budget for a vote today. So I think that right now we're in a very fluid financial situation in the overall early childhood infrastructure in terms of state financing, in terms of local financing. So I'm not going to say that there's any one place or really be able to tell you exactly where funding comes from. That's not really my role. But what I will tell you is that this is the set of tactics that we believe are necessary in order to really make significant change in kindergarten readiness.
I understand that's not your role, but you have to understand that it has to come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you make these presentations, you should have a sense that we don't have money just laying around. So to carry on, you have in your presentation, you used pre-K and kinder interchangeably, as if they were one and the same.
No, I believe that what I was talking about was a kindergarten readiness rate, which pre-K would help to give children the foundation so that they'll be ready for kindergarten.
I didn't quite get that. And then another question is, you talked about parent engagement, and the parents have to be really involved. We talk about that a lot. What are we currently doing with the pre-K program to have parent engagement or to improve parent engagement?
Sure. So there's a number of things, and I think that what we really talk about is not just parents, but working as a broad community to extend the continuum of care. So there's a couple areas that I would call out first. One, we clearly are communicating directly with parents in terms of just getting parents to bring their kids to the pre-K classroom, and have done extensive marketing efforts to try to continue to raise the awareness of the importance of pre-K with parents. We have the largest HIPPY, or Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters, program in the country, and so we will be reaching 1,000 families in the home this year, which we're excited about. But I think that it would be a mistake for us to look at this as an isolated world where we're doing this alone. What we have in Dallas is a whole series of organizations that are working across a 0 to 5 continuum to communicate with parents, and what we believe is that we play a significant role in aligning all of those community efforts so that we have broad support to build the kind of foundation for our kids that we need.
You mentioned the HIPPY program.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into the African American community?
Yeah, so I think what you'll see in our plan is very explicitly one of those tactics is to optimize our HIPPY program and work with other home visitation programs so that we're optimizing where those programs are being placed. So right now, the way the recruiting for many of these programs work is that they are going into different neighborhoods. With the HIPPY program, we go into schools by principal request and then try to wait for families to sign up. We don't think that's the most strategic way of going about it moving forward.
Okay. But I'm specifically speaking of the HIPPY program.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into bringing in the African American families?
I'm not quite sure I understand the
So
question.
is there an outreach to the African American community through the HIPPY program? I think that's pretty simple.
Well, yes, there's an outreach to all of our families, and the ratios of our HIPPY program right now mirror that of the overall district in terms of student groups.
What does that ratio look?
I want to know that off the top of my head, but I can provide that for you.
Get that for me.
Absolutely.
Okay, that would be good. I have one other question. And you said we're working with other providers. Specifically, are we working with other child care centers, or when you speak of other people that's working on that Are you speaking of other groups other than other people who are actually providing the service?
So there's a whole range of groups that we work with. So I think if you go to the written plan that we provided for the board, and if you go to page, I'm going to look at page 15.
I don't have a 15.
She's just looking at the PowerPoint.
Okay. Well, there are four ways that we work with the community. We advocate for what we think is need. We act as an information hub. We act as a strategic funder, and we act as a direct operator. I think that you are particularly asking about places where we act as a strategic funder and or have direct partnership programs.
I'm more into direct partnerships like Child Care Dallas, other child care providers.
Sure. So we have and have been building some of our public-private partnership models with child care providers. We work through a series of guidelines called the SRI guidelines or School Readiness Integration. And so what we are doing is providing certified DISD teachers for some of these child care providers so that we can create DISD classrooms using third-party center capacity. And also, that helps in terms of the overall financial sustainability for some of these providers. And in particular, we are concerned with incentivizing providers to continue to increase and or in some cases maintain high quality so that kids are going to pre-K and not nursery school.
And how many of those do we have?
Again, I would have to look at the exact number of sites, but I think that somewhere in the ballpark of 20.
Trustee Foreman, Trustee Mitchke.
Well, thanks for that presentation, Alan. I would say that of all the things we're doing in the district, I think this is the single most important thing that we could be doing, and I appreciate the efforts that have been made to put this plan together. Let me just start out. We know now that the 0 to 5 age range is a lot more important than historically we as a society ever thought it was, and how much learning and brain development goes on during that period of time. So until age 3, which is the first pre-K grade, so to speak, from ages 0 to 3, you are expanding the parental education programs like HIPPY. And we're up to 1,000 families in the HIPPY program now?
Yes, we'll be with 1,000 families this year.
And what were we last year? And do you have a recollection of?
I believe we were in the range of about 700 to 750 families.
And my understanding is that that's the largest HIPPY program in the country.
That is the largest HIPPY site in the country.
Okay. And then when we look at pre-K and one of the financing questions that Trustee Foreman asked about, the reason we don't, or one main reason we don't have more kids enrolled in pre-K at this point in time is we have a mismatch of where the kids live and where we have available space to have pre-K classes. But if we had enough space to provide pre-K to every child who was eligible, we would get state funding for half-day pre-K.
That's correct.
And so how much, because we don't have the space in the right place, how much state funding for pre-K are we missing out on?
When you include 3-year-olds, we are in the ballpark of $60 million that could be flowing into this community.
60 or 16?
6D. Yeah, 60. And so it's a huge opportunity to bring resources to our region.
Okay, so there's state funding that's already available. We don't even need a legislative change to provide more funding for pre-K. There's state funding available, approximately $60 million a year. If we could ensure that we had facilities that could accommodate the actual population in the places where we have the population.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so we're going to.
I want to put a foot on that, meaning there are other needs rather than just the tuition or the amount of money we get from the state, even fully funded. When we talk about the 0 to 3 space, when we talk about the amount of training that pre-K teachers need and early childhood teachers, we're talking about kindergarten, first and second grade training. So that's just a footnote.
Right, that the $60 million a year, that even if we could access that wouldn't be enough to cover the kinds of services that we really think need to be provided to.
Right. So if we got every single kid that's eligible for preschool, that still wouldn't be enough to cover everything we need to do in the early childhood arena.
In fact, we bake those calculations, or we bake those dollars into the finances that are included with the plan that we've provided you.
Okay, so in order to, you obviously have to do this in stages, but in order to get the most bang for our buck and get as many kids covered as soon as we can, first you started by expanding the parental education programs. And to what I understand, the maximum amount that you could and still have quality training for those parental education programs. Then we look at expanding pre-K, and we are going to have to do that in several ways. Right? We're going to have more buildings, more wings added, or modular buildings, or portables, and we're going to have to look at partnering with other folks, whether it be the City of Dallas or private organizations. But that's part of the strategic plan, is partnerships with providers who are already providing this.
Yes, so you'll see two of the 30 tactics deal specifically with public-private partnership.
Then there was a slide at the beginning here that talked about the importance of making sure that it's not just that we have pre-K, but the pre-K is quality. And in that chart, I think your assessment was, if I can find it again, that we still, even in places where we have pre-K, half the kids who go through the program are still not ready for pre-K, so we're ready for kindergarten.
That's correct. Only 46% of the kids that go through pre-K are kindergarten ready.
Okay, and so you're attacking that problem with parental education in the 0 to 3 age range, and then more significantly with improvements in training of pre-K teachers and trying to bring the ratio.
Yeah, and I would say it goes far beyond the ratio. That was one example, but there is a whole series of ways that we believe we need to increase the quality, and a lot of that, frankly, comes down to kind of given where we are today, how do we increase the specialization? So, because in the state of Texas, teachers receive an early childhood through 6th grade certification, and that puts teachers in frankly a terrible position, right? Because learning to be a teacher of a 6th grader does not make you a teacher of 3 and 4-year-olds, and it's a very different training. And so, kind of by policy, the state of Texas has said the onus is either on teachers to train themselves to be a teacher of 3 and 4-year-olds, or it's going to be on the school districts to train teachers. And so we have taken we are taking that on and making sure that we're not just putting kids into a classroom and slapping the term pre-K on it, but that we are truly following what the research has proven to be the type of nurturing pre-K environment that will lead to early development.
If I could add, there's lots of discussion in the profession right now about the pipeline for pre-K, because it is an interest across the nation and across the state on early childhood, and people recognize that there aren't enough highly qualified preschool teachers today. So this is going to be a good discussion we have for the next several years on how to grow that quality.
And then I may be coming up to my time limit here, so Dr. Blackburn, let me know. How fast could we move in terms of expanding pre-K over the next couple of years in a way that is quality and fiscally realistic?
So we anticipate that by 2020 we'll be serving 15,000 children. And so that is, now if we do our job and we are able to, while we serve 15,000 children directly, also able to incentivize quality increases in the child care space, and that's why it's not just a district job, it's an overall community job, then we can really, we'll really have something powerful.
Okay, and if we're looking at what can we do next year or the year after, what kind of growth do you think is possible?
So, again, this is assuming that we continue to stay vigilant about expanding the capacity issues in neighborhoods where the children are living. But I would fully expect that we will, for the first time, break 10,000 children enrolled in pre-K next year.
And what are we currently at?
At 9,700.
9,700.
And let me put another footnote in this, because long term, I think we need to put it on the table. Long term, as we want to grow over the next couple years, we're going to need additional funding. Where that comes from, we'll see this year whether the legislature does something to help, or whether or not we ask the board to allow us to go to the public for more money.
I would also point out, these population shifts are happening quickly. The projections we provided are for 2018, and you think about that. Now, population shifts don't happen linearly, but in some cases we're seeing that the population shifts are happening faster than we expected. If you ask anybody in Wilmer Hutchins, they'll tell you that. And so we are actually going to be facing an uphill battle. We're going to need to have a higher percentage of parents lining up to maintain enrollment given our current capacity in the attendance zones that we have, and that we're going to have to really act quickly in terms of increasing our capacity where these population shifts are happening. Having said that, despite where the population shifts are, I'm confident that we can hit the 10,000 mark next year.
Okay, well, I could probably ask questions for the next couple of hours, but I will turn it over well, let me say one other thing. I think the reason why I think this is so important is the terrifying research that we have that indicates that kids who are not reading at grade level by third grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of school. That we really need to be pushing this hard, and I appreciate the fact that you are doing that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, you think he could talk all day about this? I would be twice as long on emphasizing the same point, that this is mission critical for us.
You say only twice?
Only twice. I think there may be others who may be able to multiply that even further, but I think you'll find there's a strong commitment by this body wanting to make sure that we get there. I think my concerns always come back to 2 things. Number 1 is there are studies out there that say that quality matters, that it's not just a matter of providing pre-K, but providing high-quality pre-K. And one of the things I've not quite seen enough of is a definition of what does that mean, what does that look like, and how do we know we're providing it. So it would be helpful, I think, to add to the particular report that we're seeing some of those dimensions too, because there are studies, which is a different fear, that say that bad pre-K is actually worse than no pre-K, and that's something to pay attention to. The second is our children, especially our highest poverty children, which we see in this district more than others do, start with a lot of deficits. No books, access to resources that can be supportive. So it's not just the pre-K environment, it's everything that surrounds that. Do we build those kinds of elements into how we're approaching this?
Yeah, we do. And you'd see two. I think first I would say that for each one of those 30 tactics in this report that we provided you, which you go into depth of explanation, you'll see some of how that quality manifests on your first point. But we can send a little bit more information and clarity into that, because I think that's an excellent point. The second piece is when we are dealing with some of the tactics on continuum of care, there are two things in particular that I would call out. One is a program where we want to extend classroom time into the home, and we've actually seen in some other communities around the country a lot of success where kids are sent home with backpacks of the same type of manipulatives and toys and books and whatnot that they're using in the classroom, and so the kids are going home and asking mom or grandma to play with them using these same things, so that they're getting educational experiences in the home, and it's really been impressive, the results of some of those programs, particularly in the Chicago area. I think we also, as we start to push quality in terms of vertical alignment earlier and earlier, one of the tools we have been working on is our families don't always have access to computers or internet, but they do have access to smartphones. And so we have been working on a series of ways to use technology to try to reach into the home, show parents what quality interactions with their kids look like, and provide a resource. Because what we feel like is Dallas is fairly rich in terms of its social services. What's very difficult is navigating those social services. And so it's not just us working, we have all of our government bodies working together to create alignment of our services and then try to make that accessible to parents. And so it doesn't matter if we have it if no one can access it.
Well, and that brings me to a different question, but not unrelated. Different jurisdictions, different geographies have different resource opportunities. You can go into certain areas, may not be even in the city of Dallas, that are equipped to be supportive and help coordinate, but you get into, the city of Dallas, for example, and your social service structure is very different, and geographically we're talking 390 square miles or some number, not to mention 2 counties. So how do you, or 3 counties, how do you look at that part of the story, and how do we coordinate better with our municipalities and other partners who are our service providers?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, which is early childhood in many ways is contextual, and so one of the things that we've provided for you is attendance zone by attendance zone is some community mapping of information that's readily available, so that we know what resources. Does community A have hospitals? Maybe we could access hospitals as a key way of reaching them, or grocery stores, or so there's any number of communication channels, and it's not always government. And so, for example, for our Spanish-speaking population, which is, as you know, very robust in this district, one of the most powerful tools we have in this community is Univision, and so they are a more trusted source than government in many cases, and so we don't want to put ourselves in a box of the type of organizations. What we care about is what is going to reach parents and caregivers in a way that that they can trust and that they can make actionable. And so I wish I could give you a one-size-fits-all answer to that, but it's not a one-size-fits-all problem.
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out to Seattle. Anybody who's following the news and was looking at sort of the national news knows that they passed pre-K. So I'm extraordinarily convinced that at this point we need our leadership coming from our jurisdictions, not just our school districts, because it is an important partnership, especially around the supportive resources and the community-based elements that have to be present. And physicality does matter, especially when you're a geography of our size.
I agree wholeheartedly, and one of the things I will tell you about Seattle, because we've communicated with them, is that their district, they did a lot of planning in advance of this so that they're able to hit the ground running. And so what we want to make sure of is that we put our district in a position whenever the other community bodies act and recognize that this is something that we have to do. We want to be in position to execute and take advantage of that. And not have to start the process when that happens.
Echo that, and glad that that's what's happening. Appreciate the report and appreciate the fine work, and we just got to move a lot quicker, and certainly are going to have to think about the financial considerations as we continue to grow. Thank you.
Dr. Blackburn?
Alan, back in February, I think you said that we would have a plan for early childhood by October. Is this the plan you were talking about?
So this is the plan. So we sent it to you. It should be in the trustee, I guess, the tracker. Yeah.
This presentation?
Not the presentation. This 245-page report.
That's in the tracker?
Yeah.
Under the board's reports library, that's where it is, sir.
Yeah, I think that's where y'all hide things.
That's where I read it.
I think that's where you hide things. So, for this presentation, you said we're going to increase the number of students by 30,000 going into next year.
No. Like, so we are hoping that we would exceed the 10,000 mark in enrollment for next year.
You're going to increase about 3,000 students.
And that would be about 300.
You're going to increase about 300 students.
Yes.
We're going to increase pre-K by 300.
I'm willing to commit to that number. Now I hope we increase it by more than that.
You know, my discontent right now is that a couple of years ago we were rush, let's change, let's do more. And now what we're hearing is, it's going to take a little while. We got to slow down, slow your ball, slow your roll. So we're only going to increase about 300, but yet you say there's a need for about how many thousand?
So what I would say is I don't think anyone is slowing down at all. There's a whole range of things that we have to do for early childhood, and we have increased by approximately 1,500 to 2,000 students over the last couple of years. And so even just maintaining that is, especially given what we're seeing on the ground conditions, is a big lift. But also, what I really want to make sure is that our early childhood efforts are not just about enrollment. We have layered a coaching infrastructure in place already this year. We have increased our home visitation program.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
In the document that you put on the board tracker, the 200-some page?
Yes.
Okay, I will download that, and then I'll make an appointment to talk to you about that.
I would love that.
I can tell you this presentation doesn't tell me a whole lot.
And I understand.
The 200-page document has the information that I'm looking for, and maybe the information that other people are looking for, because quite a few of us are asking, how many for next year, how many for the year after that, how many for that, and that's what I'm not seeing right here. So I'll make an appointment to talk to you about the 200-plus page document.
That'd be great.
Trustee Bingham.
Yeah. On the, you were talking about increasing possibly 400 aides. What's the cost on that?
Yeah, so let me...
I think somewhere I read 25 to 35,000 salary. I mean, I'm just trying to get in my mind, how much is this going to cost us this spring?
Sure. Give me 1 second and I will tell you. So if we were to do the full rollout, which would not happen in a single year.
If we did.
Okay, let's say we did, a full rollout would be approximately $13 million.
One of the issues that came up this fall had to do with transportation of the pre-K children. Now, I'll be straight up, it gives me heartburn thinking about putting 3- and 4-year-olds on a bus. But somewhere along the line, we do have to address it. And is your team coming up with some kind of hey, this is what we think we should do, this is what we shouldn't do, something that can address this, because there are a lot of kids who probably don't go to pre-K because there are transportation difficulties, but does that the concern and the need have to kind of balance out?
Yes, I'd say two things. It's one of the reasons why you're hearing me talk so much about pre-K space within the attendance zone, and that is accessible to parents. And I don't think that I certainly don't think that is the only reason. And I think that if we need significantly more insights into before we can say that that's the reason why some parents aren't showing up. Having said that, we are going through a due diligence process so that we understand what are the potential options for transportation. What kind of a lift would that be? What kind of cost would that be? But just as a practical matter, there are trade-offs in anything that we do, and so it is one tool in the toolbox that could be a powerful tool, but it is something that we have to weigh against everything else that's in this plan also, because as has been pointed out, we have to have some cost controls as well.
And then the third thing, what I've heard today is we have a need, of course, for more space for pre-K, but there's also the component of parent education. And back when I was a teenager, 1,000 years ago, you had teenage girls who got pregnant in school, but it was kept very secret. Nowadays, we have a lot of teenage girls who do get pregnant and they have children. Have y'all ever wrestled with the idea of possibly in the comprehensive high schools having a pre-K unit in each high school, comprehensive high school, and it would serve a dual purpose? Not only could it offer pre-K instruction to the students who have children, and maybe even the faculty members and the people that are directly around the high schools, but it could also provide an opportunity for parent education for these young women and young men. I don't want to exclude them, to provide them with the parenting skills. And it's right there, it's in our high schools, every high school we've got. And I know several years back, when I say several, probably 20 years back, I know Sigerville High School did have a pre-K program in it where children could come in. But to me, you've got a built-in audience here.
So I'd answer that in a couple ways. The first is when we talk about a grow our own pipeline, we're not just talking about TAs to teachers. We're also talking about some of our current high school students to become quality TAs. I mean, it's a great career path. So that's a great opportunity for grow our own. And so there is certainly some synergies that we want to continue to take a look at. I think when we talk about alignment of overall community resources, you brought up the issue of teen pregnancy, which is something that I can tell you not only is a concern for us in the district, but is a concern, very explicit concern of many organizations throughout Dallas. And for example, we have the Nurse Family Partnership Program in Dallas, and and when we talk about optimizing home visitation portfolios, one of the issues is sometimes we are serving parents with these home visitation programs that the risk factors of those parents don't perfectly match.
Alan, you're going a little bit off on what I wanted you to go on, because my focus, and I don't mean to, I mean to interrupt you, is that I think that we have a resource in that we've got 23 comprehensive high schools. And some of them are overcrowded, but some of them aren't. But they also, most of them have land where you could put in a modular or you could put in portables. And why shouldn't we be thinking outside the box a little bit and utilize those campuses as a resource for pre-K? And it serves a multitude of things to do, because there's pre-K for the children. There's parent education. I mean, we're not going to stop teen pregnancy, okay? That horse is out of the barn.
Several thousand years now.
Yes. And so, you can train parents, because I don't think anybody has a child thinking, I want to be an awful parent. I think most people have children, they want to be the best possible parent they can, but they might not have the resources or the examples to help them. But then again, it goes into the third peg would be, it could be a way to train to a career option. We talk about career and technology. My goodness, here we've got it right there. High schools, these young men and women, this could be their career pathway. They could get career certification, partner with one of the community colleges. I think we're missing something when we don't tap into that. Maybe Joyce, I see you over there shaking your head, so I'm hoping you're agreeing with me. Good. I hope I'm not, Joyce and I aren't the only ones on the board that say, let's not miss this opportunity.
So I think it's a great idea. It admittedly is not something that we have explicitly called out in the planning, but I think it's something that we want to talk about more.
And I'm in total agreement with Nancy, and one of the things is that when we start talking about transportation, that won't be an issue because most of those people are going to be in that area to start with, and it would be a great opportunity for career readiness along with serving that particular community if that opportunity presents itself.
Okay. You heard my message.
Thank you.
That's my wish list.
Alan.
Adamson has an early childhood center on campus, do they not? So we have that model.
Who does?
Adamson.
Oh.
So we do have that model in place.
Townview.
300 more students next year in pre-K.
So yeah, I think that again, we originally had projected 9,500 students for this year. So what we would have projected is to, for the first time, reach 10,000 students next year. And given kind of where the population shifts are taking place, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Sure, but that's only about 12 classrooms. 13 classrooms.
Yeah, I understand, but when you kind of look at the speed that our population shifts are taking place, and the fact that we will be less positioned to have families in attendance zones where capacity currently exists, if we don't build more classroom space, and I'm not sure yet that I've heard an affirmative response that we have a classroom plans to open for next year in some of those attendance zones. That until we know what the capacity picture looks like in those attendance zones, I think that actually even if we were to increase by not a single student, we're actually going to have to work harder to maintain our enrollment levels than we did this past year.
So we're working on demographic and capacity studies now. And we have some underutilized elementary schools that we're going to target, correct?
Yeah, so again, kind of it's a contextual issue, right? So we have some elementary schools that have available space right now. Those for a number of reasons. In some cases, what we are seeing is that that's a demand issue, and that we really need to focus in on demand in those areas that kids are choosing sometimes nursery school over pre-K or any number of other possible reasons. But often it is that we have a misalignment with where the kids are living and where that space actually exists.
Just forward to more information. Trustee Morath.
This is an extremely impressive plan. I know it's a long time coming. I think you've heard everybody here beat the drum that this is a unified board in support of expanding early childhood education in a quality manner, and this is a very thoughtful plan. So thank you for all of your efforts and leadership. I have a couple of questions on a few of the specific tactics. Tactic number 21 and 23 are both explicitly tied to public-private partnerships. Right now, under the SRI model, we're providing labor in that partnership arrangement, and I believe we're also providing a little bit of money. Is that right?
So right now, we're not explicitly providing money, but once that becomes a DISD classroom, we may purchase some equipment or different things that have monetary value
So
for
we're
it.
providing labor and perhaps in-kind additional resources.
Correct.
Okay. So when do you anticipate a model that would be visible to us and any of the private providers in the marketplace that would be, rather than us providing labor and in-kind services, we provide cash for them to serve our kids?
Yeah, so I think that you will have a first iteration of a model like that in short order this year or this school year. I think the probably the model where we only provide cash, that is still something that, quite frankly, we're wrestling with the mechanics and the legalese of, and so I clearly think that is one of those things that we want to look at, because the more we can incentivize quality, not just within those classrooms that we're directly operating, but throughout the childcare space, the more our kids will be prepared and showing up kindergarten ready.
So the existing SRI partnership will be expanded to include cash at some point in time this year, but a model where, for example, a private accredited provider is caring for one of our 4-year-olds and we're passing on a portion of ADA to them. You don't anticipate that occurring in this academic year at all?
I wouldn't commit to it in this academic year. So
do you anticipate that happening in the next academic year?
We're working on it right now. So I think that assuming that we can work through the legalese, we would provide that as soon as possible.
And I would add, yeah, part of it's dependent on the legalities of it and how that will work. But our intent is to try to expand that, because you've already heard we don't have the short-term capacity, and there's a large.
It solves the problem of physical
right. That's
capacity,
what
at least in areas.
And partnerships, especially if we want more of these facilities and classrooms to be in the neighborhood. So. We'll look at the legalities of it, and then we can work from there.
And then so items 13 through 16 are in the 0 to 3 parent education. We've had some conversation about HIPPY. HIPPY is a 3 to 5-year-old program. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So are we doing anything currently in the 0 to 3 space?
Yeah, so we do make some investment with Avance, and so there's some strategic investment, and that reaches parents of 0 to 3. I would point out that while HIPPY is a program for parents of 3 and 5-year-olds, often those parents, yes. Having said that, I think what you'll see on page 15 of the plan is that there are 4 key areas that we think that we're going to be operating in some capacity in all of those, and one of those is as a strategic investor, and so. There are a series of research-based models for parent home visitation and parent engagement. I think that we are anticipating to have a broader portfolio than just HIPPY and Avance. So that's one area. I'd also point out that as we look at 2-generation strategies, still a great predictor of a child's overall success is the educational attainment of their parent.
And just to follow up with a question that Trustee Foreman asked. HIPPY, I've heard in the community that people think HIPPY is focused on Hispanics. I don't believe that's correct.
It's not.
It came out of Israel, so I suppose if it were anything, it would be focused on Israelis. But our implementation of HIPPY is school by school, and so we could have HIPPY at schools that are predominantly Hispanic today, and it's your intention to try to expand HIPPY in a sort of more thoughtful manner moving forward?
That's exactly right. So, we certainly are able to get pretty granular in terms of our kindergarten readiness rates, and then not just looking at HIPPY in an isolated universe, but there are a portfolio of these programs throughout Dallas, and so what we're trying to do is, again, align all of the programs that are there and try to connect the program to families that have the risk profile that is most in line. So, HIPPY and, for example, a program like Parents as Teachers, we want to make sure that we're communicating and not and the right hand's communicating with the left hand.
And do we have an implementation of Parents as Teachers today?
No, we do not, but we have significant implementations throughout Dallas as a community.
So that's something that we would invest through, use our dollars to support those efforts that are already in place?
Correct. We probably, in a situation like that, I'm not sure that we would want to take on the role of direct provider, but we may want to look at other folks that are providing that program and that are in a position to expand that program.
Let me shift focus a bit. Have we settled on a multidimensional kindergarten readiness assessment?
So what we use is the Brigance as a formative assessment at the beginning of kindergarten. But in terms of progress tracking from year to year, what we are working with is the ISIP assessment because of its predictive value for future academic success. Reading. That's correct, but it is more predictive in terms of future academic achievement.
Okay. So the reason I asked about the multidimensional assessment is the growing body of research on institutional care arrangements for young children that actually erode social and emotional competency in those kids, and so from an outcomes perspective, when I think of the non-academic domains that are measured in Brigance as being something that I think it's fairly critical for us to track as we expand our early childhood focus. And with the 3-year-old program in particular, are we committed to doing only full day care, or have we talked about half day care for that?
I think that determination is still up in the air. I think that's largely we're going to need to test both, and we're going to need to kind of understand if we provided half day care, can we get the parents to come to the classroom? Because there's, but no, we have not made a sweeping one size fits all determination.
The research that I'm most familiar with in the early childhood space is from the Perry Prescope model in the 70s, and that was a 2-year institutional care program, but it was only a half-day program for both years. The other half of the day, the teachers were conducting home visits, so sort of an integrated hippie formal care. So do you anticipate that being part of our model?
Sorry, so say that one more time. And which part would be part of our model? Half day?
Basically, a half day in conjunction with parental education.
Yeah, so again, that's why it's really important that we really strategically align our hippie program and other programs so that, again, we'll be able to identify children or populations of children that are most in need of intervention, and in those cases, we're going to want to layer interventions.
Yeah, I know. Mr. Miles, the Destination 2020 plan is integrated in its thought process. So you have this extremely aggressive early childhood expansion, which I think we're all very supportive of, but you also have a specific social emotional component that this district has really never done. I just want to stress my support for that specific element. Especially in our early grades, because I think in the Destination 2020 as a whole, it's just in 4th and 8th grade that you have an assessment component built into that, and I think we need to make sure that our efforts in early childhood we're assessing social emotional growth in the pre-K through 3rd space.
Noted. Thanks for bringing it. We have not talked a lot about the social emotional part of Destination 2020, although it's in writing and it's part of the plan. But what I hear you saying also is that not just elementary, middle, and high school social emotional learning plans, but really be specific about the early childhood part.
Okay, Trustee Foreman has one final question, then we'll wrap this up.
It's actually two. The first question is, how many vacant seats do we currently have in pre-K and kinder?
So I wouldn't be able to speak on that off the top of my head, and I'm going to have to get you those numbers because now that we've gone through our leveling process, those numbers have changed. But I know that we've provided that on a couple occasions, and we can provide an update.
I'd like to know that, and to speak to what Trustee McGrath said about the hippie program. Perceptions are real to the people who are perceiving them. So with that said, what I'd like to have also is of that 1,000 families that you are currently working on the hippie program with, a breakdown of the ethnicity of those families.
One final comment, and this isn't a question, this is more a thank you to the 0 to 5 initiative and all of the work they're doing to support our efforts, and really appreciate all the partners that have come to support this critical area for this district. Thank you.
Okay, we are now on to item C, Minority Women Business Enterprise Report, first quarter fiscal year 2014-2015.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I will present for you the Financial Services MWBE Quarterly Report, first quarter, fiscal year 2014-2015, and will cover July 1st, 2014 through September the 30th, 2014. It will reflect both prime and subcontracting participation. The first slide, page 2 at the bottom, is actually the 2008 bond program MWBE utilization to date. It's from the inception of the first payment up through September the 30th, 2014. And for bond-funded construction, our goal is 30%. Cumulative to date, we're at 49%. Bond-funded professional services, our goal is 35%. Cumulative to date, we're at 42% MWBE participation. The next slide is pretty much a snapshot of the current quarter, July 1 through September the 30th. Again, the goal is 30%. However, for the quarter, we are at 77.9%. And a lot of this participation was for work done on Terry, Bushman, and Comstock, and the prime was actually a certified minority woman-owned company. However, the cumulative to date number is 49%. On bond-funded professional services, same quarter snapshot, our goal is 30%. For bond-funded MWBE utilization for professional services, the goal is 35%. However, we are at 30.1% MWBE participation. Cumulative to date is 42%. The next slide is pretty much the quarterly comparisons showing you the construction numbers as well as the professional services number. Again, with construction versus a 30% goal, our range has been 43% to 91% for these respective quarters. And for professional services, a goal of 35%. And again, you'll see that range anywhere from 25% up to 57%. Our next page is pretty much targeting the QSCAB funds, and that is qualified school construction bonds, and that's dealing with the renovation of existing middle school science labs, as well as converting the middle school science spaces, as well as HVAC improvements. However, on here you have a goal of 30%, but in actuality it should be 35% MWB goal, and our utilization is 38.6%, and that's bond funded Q-scale projects, Fund 633. 633 is Q-scale funds. MWB utilization on goods and services, general operating funds, and again, this consists of technology, books, grants, food, office supplies, materials, etc., curriculum and instruction. On this one, we have a goal of 30%. We are at 18% MWBE utilization for this quarter. We have fallen short of the utilization in this area. However, we are developing initiatives designed to help us to increase in the MWB utilization. Some of the things that we're working on, of course, we have an MWB advisory committee that we work with. We also will have an ISD, Independent School District Expo, where we will have 17 school districts coming together at the Minority Supplier Development Council, their procurement directors and buyers, and we'll be bringing in companies to come in and talk about doing business with our respective school districts. We also have had here recently a MWBE Vendor Expo, where we had price agreement vendors that had won price agreements to meet district staff, the office manager, etc., We also have participated in summits. We also have multiple vendor awards that we have been utilizing. We've had a series of cooperative training sessions as well. We also have an extensive outreach. Also, a MWB evaluation scoring criteria is designed to assist us with MWB utilization. And also we have a 2015 Knowledge is Power Conference where we're going to try to address the underutilization in this goods and services category. The next slide is series of comparisons for MWB utilization in goods and services. And of course, again, our goal is 30%. Our range is the lowest we've been in a while of 18% up to 32%. That one quarter where we were able to meet our MWBE goal. The bottom part is actually the Q scale for professional services. The first quarter, we were at 24%. Second quarter, this fiscal year 14-15 quarter one, we are at 39%. And I want to share with you some of our MWB services at a glance. Of course, our goal is to maximize the participation of minority and women-owned companies. However, we have some upcoming MWBE focused and coordinated workshops. Again, the Independent School District Expo, as well as the 2015 Knowledge is Power Conference. We also have, during this particular quarter, conducted 19 individualized training sessions where we meet one-on-one in our office to talk to companies about doing business with Dallas ISD, how to research for information, as well as who are some of their key contacts. Also, we have participated in 27 outreach events as well as activities. I wanted to mention some of the MWBE nominations and recognitions that we have received. The Black Contractors Association Public Entity of the Year nominee, their MWBE Advocate nominee, the DFW Minority Supplier Development Council Public Sector Agency nominee, Supplier Diversity Professional nominee. Also not listed is a nomination from the Women's Business Council Southwest as far as the MWBE advocacy. And all of those are not self-reported nomination. It must come from one of their board members or one of their community members as well. And also we have one specialist, certified Texas School Business Specialist certification that we have obtained. And on the board agenda, you will have the 2015 MWBE Advisory Committee nomination list. And then should they be approved by the board, I have identified their potential dates meeting here at Dallas ISD in the administration building, should you like to attend.
What we're going to do is, I know Dr. Blackburn had an initial question. We're going to stay one.
Okay.
Nominees from last year because I don't remember seeing the form. Did we use the same nominees from last year for that bond?
What do you mean nominees?
What you're saying is coming on the board agenda.
The 2000, oh no, we actually have a new list as well. We've included additional persons. Yes, some of the same people are there, yes. But we also have some additional persons that will be joining that list as well.
Person can serve this year.
Yes, and actually she is on the agenda as well.
My other question, do you know why we went...
Here you go, Tristan. Will you move your mic down just a little, Annie, and see if that... Point it down a little. Yeah, see if that helps. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ms. RT, do you know why we went down in goods and service from 26% to 18%? What happened?
It was due to the nature of the spend for that particular category. We had a lot of maybe some technology procurements like netbooks, notebooks, etc., multiple function devices, it appears. However, those companies that received the bulk of payments for this specific quarter were not MWBEs at the prime level. However, some of them have MWBE subcontracting participation. So we are reaching out with them to ascertain what their spend will be with MWBE subcontractors, and then we're going to show that information reported in the next quarter. And also there were some large, it appeared to be educational and curriculum type procurements that also were provided to non-MWBEs with no MWBE subcontracting participation. So when we took all of those spends into consideration, that's why we were at 18% for this respective quarter.
You said it was educational or what now?
It appeared to be education and curriculum related procurements, as well as some of those technology type equipment purchases as well.
Just curious. And so they were non-MWBE?
Yes, there were some substantial dollars to non-MWBE primes.
Can I get a list of our spend with those companies?
Yes.
You understand what I'm?
Yes.
A list of them, and then how much we've spent
Yes.
of that particular contract. Of those.
Yes. Yes.
Just curious to know. Then so there was not any opportunity for MWBE.
MWBs are given the opportunity to compete on the contracts. However, when they are not awarded the contract, of course, we have to go to the most responsible bidder. So you will see some MWB spend in those particular area, but it's just that the bulk of the spend was with some of the non-MWBE companies.
To see, because we went from 26% to 18%, and then our policy, I'm looking at that, we've not reached our goal as a policy with 30%. So I would just like to see follow the money. Yeah, because this impacts kids too. Okay, I'm good.
Dr. Blackburn?
You mentioned about the latest round of construction being a woman-owned prime.
Latest round of constructions being a woman-owned prime.
QSAP?
No.
The lab.
The QSCAP is actually on.
Well, there's different pieces of key
I know, but my point, you mentioned about a prime that was a woman. Just trying to find out who that is, because I don't know that I know it.
Well, as far as a lot of our MWBE primes in construction have typically not been female owned in the past. Of course, we've utilized a certified minority or woman-owned company, but we may have. I'm sorry, you're probably referring to Construction Zone Morning Glory Services was a certified MWB joint venture partner. Yes, that is correct. That is correct, and they are certified. They're a joint venture partner. That is correct.
Chief Foreman?
How are you doing?
I'm good. When did we ever reach the 30% goal for the services?
Great question, and yes. On this particular slide, fiscal year 12-13, quarter 2, we were at 32%. For this particular quarter, I think we had some large technology procurement, some spend, coupled with some large food and child nutrition services purchases.
That's what I was getting to. Now we're at where we've had large technology spends, but no minority participation.
We have some minority participation, but for this specific quarter, then it was, yes, that's correct. With some of the non-MWBEs received the bulk of the payments for this particular quarter. But we do have minority participation in technology, yes.
You don't purchase anything. Miss Tate, could you come up, please?
Yes, I'll be glad to. She does all the buying.
Could you help me understand? We went down from 26 to 18% in this quarter.
It's just, and the quarter would be July 1 through the end of September.
So were the bulk of the spends in technology or in instructional materials or?
The largest spend was for Lenovo laptops. Mm-hmm. The second one was for the copier leases from Minolta. Then followed up by Mondo Publishing, which is the textbooks. And see, this is always at the beginning of the year for the school year. The next one would be the Educational Service Center, which actually doesn't, they're a service center. We have Teach for America, Achieve 3000. Those are professional development.
Back a minute. Teach for America.
Yes, ma'am.
What do they do?
Excuse me?
What did they do? What did we pay them for?
I would have to look up to see all the different line items.
Okay.
But I just have a overall.
So what was that amount? Do you have it?
$807,000. We have Deloitte, who provides our auditing services. We We have HP, which is Hewlett Packard, which are printers usually right off of that one. We have $267,000 to Lakeshore, which is a classroom supply type item, educational classroom supply. Those are some of the largest. McGraw-Hill also provides textbooks. So those are our really large spends for the first quarter.
So do we encourage any of these companies to do joint ventures?
Yes, we do. We do encourage them. It's actually a staple of our MWBE program and plan. For instance, these companies must complete our MWBE compliance guidelines and forms. As a part of that is the joint venture question. And also they are given numerical MWBE scores. For instance, 5 out of 20 is based upon the joint venture plan as well.
So how often do they do that, Ms. Partee?
Well, in goods and services, it's not typical. We may find a handful of companies that come together as a joint venture. We had some here that we're evaluating today that is a joint venture. So it's very few and far between in this particular type of commodities.
And how often does that happen in the on the construction side?
Very readily, quite often. The nature of those procurements are so competitive. The differentiator between the first and second company could be less than a half of a point. So they are going after every component of all areas, not just the MWBE, but everything to maximize their MWBE participation. So you'll see it quite readily in that area.
So maybe we need to really look at how we're pushing on the goods and services side. I know you guys are doing all you can, but maybe more could be done. The reason I say that is I think everybody knows I served on the dartboard, and a whole different dynamic in the way that they approached vendors and making sure that they got their minority participation numbers. And I think the district might work with agencies who are doing a good job. Not to say you're not doing a good job on the construction side, but I still have a little trouble on the goods and services side. And I kind of understand a little bit of these dynamics, being in an area where goods and services were. So, but I just think it would be good to look at that. But thank you.
We are looking at the joint ventures as a whole to make sure that it's meaningful as well. So the MWB Advisory Committee, we're also talking to the community members regarding what we could be doing or should be doing differently or continue as it relates to our joint venture component. So it's not just a Dallas ISD discussion, the public entities are as well, because those companies are married per se for that duration of that contract.
Good question. One more question. I promise I'll quit. So the advisory committee makes suggestions.
That is correct.
So, and where does that go from there?
They go to directly to Kim and myself. They've also made suggestions to the trustees as well in the form of a letter.
Trustee Jones and then Trustee Mitch Kane and then Trustee Jones.
Just trying to get a handle on the overall picture for this area. So we have separate requirements for goods and services and bond construction, as I understand it, right?
Not necessarily separate requirements. We use the same language, the same forms, the same MWBE evaluation scoring criteria.
What I mean is our goal is to hit 30%, at least 30% in each of those categories, right?
That is correct.
And in looking at the slide presentation, I think you indicated that we're about 48% in the construction services, and it's hard to just use a quarter, an 18 for the last quarter, but it looked like we were below 30 when you look back period. But just taking the 48% in the bond construction area for an example, and the 18% from the last quarter in the goods and services. If we aggregated the two of those and the total spend, now obviously both areas are not going to be the same exact size, but how are we in the aggregate if we aggregated the total and the total percentage of MWBE?
Say just a quick calculation, we'll definitely be exceeding, I would think, the 30% overall. If we took all district-wide purchases, bond and non-bond, and QSCAP together, we would be, I would think, exceeding our 30% goal numerically. But as far as we aggregated it in construction only, and we were at 47%.
Okay. Okay, that gives me a handle. Even obviously, our goals are to hit at least 30% in both areas. But when you look at the big picture, we are over the 30%. Thank you.
35 in one area, sir.
Trustee Jones?
Didn't really have any questions. I just wanted to compliment that you all are working so closely together and are looking at strategies and innovations that can improve our overall participation rate and the quality of the people providing services and products and in our procurement. So I just wanted to say thank you. I've been on this board now a little over 2+ years, and I've watched a continuous improvement in this area. And a really strong commitment by this district, and to do it in consistent fashion with making sure it aligns with our procurement, but more importantly, that it is the highest standard of delivery of goods and services. And it's really wonderful and very heart-affirming for me to see women lead construction. Women make great engineers, so I'll just say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones.
Yes, and there was another construction firm, Limco Construction Services, also a certified MWB company as well. Limco, that's correct.
And that's a non-traditional area for women. I mean, it should be emphasized, it's not an area that you see a lot, so it's incredible that we're making inroads there. Thank you.
The only, I just want to echo Trustee Foreman's comments as it relates to other entities that are in the same line of work. And I know that I see you all out all the time, and I always love the last slide where you show that you've been out and doing your work and your due diligence. But when I see the presentations now, I've seen a few. That's the question that always comes up, is that I know that there are other entities out there that are doing the same type of work, and so what type of best practices are we attempting to seek to better understand how we may be able to utilize those knowledge and skills within our own entity. So I would encourage you to continue to do that, and I'm looking forward to the continued work ahead. Thank you both so much. Okay, trustees, we are now on to item D, cooperative purchasing. Do we have somebody's going to present on purchasing?
Yes.
That would be me.
Go ahead.
What you have before you is just a summative report on which was required by the Texas Education Code, that we bring this to you once a year just for you to see what kind of fees we pay to be members of the different cooperatives. So that's what's behind the executive summary as to what we actually pay in fees to be a member. And there's only actually three cooperatives where we pay a fee to actually be a member. And those are just usually administrative fee for the cooperatives. That's it. Questions?
We appreciate it. Okay, trustees, we're now on to policy updates. Trustee Cowan, would you please lead us through the policies?
Sure.
That might be the quickest report that I think we've ever had, Kimmy, so congratulations.
Policies might go that fast.
Yeah. Trustee Cowan.
6A1. Consider and take possible action to approve the amendment to board policy local other revenues, grants from private sources. This is a second read, sponsored by Jim Terry, Chief Financial Officer. Updates from the last time we discussed this, Mr. Terry?
Good afternoon, board members. No, this is there is one slight change, and that was on page 1 of 3. We eliminated the grant council, which apparently has not been in effect for at least 4 years. So it reads, the superintendent of schools or designee shall recommend which grants in an amount greater than 100,000 shall require internal evaluation on the evaluation of the assessment department's internal service fund. And the rest is just $150,000, which goes along with what we bring to the board to look at for procurement.
Any questions? Trustee Foreman?
I still have some concerns about the major gifts being up to $150,000 and the staff actually accepting those on behalf of the board. Because I think it's a board responsibility to accept all gifts. I think that's a part of our overall duty to accept the gifts. And for me, this board continues to give its responsibility away to the administration. And if we're going to continue to do that, then we really don't need to be here. We just don't need to be here. We have to understand what's coming in and how it's coming in, and to make sure that there are no conflicts. I heard your reasoning the last time, so I'm not looking for your reasoning. What I am saying to the board, speaking directly to this board, we cannot continue to give away our responsibility as a board, and we should, in fact, be accepting all gifts that come before us. That's it.
Trustee Mitchke?
I missed the board briefing when this last month when this was first being discussed, but is there a legal policy or education code requirement that the board accept gifts? Now, I guess, Jack, that might be a question for you, and if you don't know the answer off the top of your head, you can.
I can check on that to make sure.
What policy?
Maybe this policy. I'm just aware of the board policy that says if it's over 25,000, that to accept it.
It's local policy.
I think it's local,
Yeah.
but I'll double check on that.
I checked legal and I didn't find anything.
Yeah. Oh, and Jim, this is probably for you. Are you aware of what other district benchmarks might be for this?
I know they're all over the place. I mean, some boards don't do it at all. Some boards do less than 25,000. I will say this is any donation 5,000 or greater comes through the ERCO officer, especially if it has to do with E-ratable vendors. Yeah.
Okay, so it has to be approved by the
Yes.
ERCO. Okay. Jane, were you about to give us some insight on this? Yeah.
Just mention, we have visited with Austin ISD about their board policy, and they don't even accept nonprofit gifts. The support that comes from Boys and Girls Clubs and other nonprofits, they don't accept that as a dollar value until the end of the year. There's a summary statement issued. These are the gifts from the nonprofits that support the district.
And the board doesn't have to approve the
No,
receipt
it's
of the
just
gifts.
a report to the board.
Okay.
So we can check.
Okay, and then, of course, one of the things that we're concerned about, and Trustee Foreman touched on this, would be any gifts that come with any explicit or implicit strings attached to them. How do we monitor, or how do we monitor those?
Those go through the legal process. So legal's looking at those things, and sometimes they have us adjust or make changes to what the nonprofit or the business even sometimes is asking in condition for their gift or the needs that they have to make the gift go forward.
And we set those up on the accounting side. We'll either put them in, it could be a trust account, or it could be special revenue funds. And so if there are conditions to it, to make sure that they meet those conditions. And if you think about it, that's exactly what our special revenue funds department does, is set it up and look for compliance to make sure we're in agreement with those donations or money that's coming down from the federal side.
And we also have, of course, if they want data from us, then they must complete either a data sharing request and or a research proposal.
Okay. I guess I would request that we do a survey of a few of the other large districts in Texas and see what the benchmarks are, and then Jack, if you would just get back to us and let us know whether there is an education code requirement that the board accept gifts, or whether that can be done by the administration if the board chooses to do it that way. Thank you.
Trustee Jones?
Thank you. During the last briefing, I raised, I think, almost exactly the same concerns regarding, the rationale for why this board first set a limit or an amount, and then, there was some conversation around the fact that raising the limit had to do with being able to get things through quicker. One of the things I have not seen, and I believe there was a question on the trustee tracker, and I looked at the response, was an understanding of what the real issue that was originally raised, which had to do with timing, looked like. And the original concern, as we had heard, or one of the reasons why the limits wanted to be raised, had to do with schools not getting what they need quick enough, or there not being enough of a time horizon because of the nature of it has to come before the board. And the thought was a larger gift amount would give more flexibility. I haven't seen that evidence, and I'd like to see it. And in talking to a number of campuses, what I hear back is really more around the process itself, and not a whole lot of clarity how it should work from a timing perspective, and that's been a expressed concern. Oftentimes, when I've gotten the feedback from them, they've also provided that most of the stuff they weren't even sure needed to go before the board. In other words, the type of gift or the nature of it. And so there's also some confusion about when there may be an existing agreement and there's follow-on money, or additional types of resources are given, but they're not qualified a certain way, or I don't know. So I think it would be really helpful to be far more explicit in what we currently do and how we do it before we go changing threshold limits. I could support a change in a threshold limit, but I need to understand that first piece. And then the second piece I'm extraordinarily concerned about has to do with prospective conflicts, and a lot of backdooring of gifts that there's not a whole lot of transparency around, and size does matter here. So a $50,000 gift is still a pretty substantive gift, and to a specific campus, that's an awful lot of resources. So understanding that would be also helpful, and I echo Dan's request to see what others do and how they deal with the conflicts issue. I'm gratified to hear that we follow a very strict process with respect to the ERCO. because that's clearly going to be this body's biggest concern, that all comes out. But I have a different question today, and that has to do with anonymous donations. Do we take such donations? I mean, can somebody come in and say, I want to give you $1 million, but I don't want you to...
I don't think our legal department would be...
We could draw up all the agreements, but what it comes down to is if it's public money, it's going to be...
It's got to be no. I mean, that's the bottom line. And that's what I wanted to hear, because in the private sector, obviously anonymous donations happen all the time. Large organizations like symphonies and so forth benefit from such largesse. But in our world, there is an important part about the disclosure and the transparency, and I want to underscore that as we talk about this. But I also want to say thank you for the hard work. I know you guys have been amazing, bringing a tremendous number of resources from all different areas into this district, and nobody wants to get in the way of that. So that's not the questions that you're hearing. I think the concerns are always to make sure that the board has knowledge, and that it also makes sure that it avoids any conflicts, and that it's also that check and balance. If it's all going through the administration, then you don't have the check and balance part of the process, and that's important to this body. And I think that echoes Trustee Foreman's concerns. Thank you.
This lady right here does a wonderful job, and she does have her procedures, which we will send to you.
I think the issue that I've heard, and I appreciate that, is really how that's known throughout.
We're in the middle of training every principal in the district right now by feeder patterns. We're about halfway fit. Well, I've got almost all of them booked, but yeah, so it's an update. A lot of folks are new, but we've talked about everything from ethical issues to who can do what and when, and who you have to talk to in the district to get approval for certain things.
I appreciate the really proactive effort in all of this, because we've had a lot of people come to this district wanting to bring gifts, and making it as easy as possible certainly is the goal. So thank you.
Sure. You asked for $150,000 threshold. What's the magic about 150,000?
Nothing magic.
Okay. Then we could say 50 then. So along this line, on number 2, we say this threshold shall apply per donation, not per donor. I would suggest that we change this sentence so that it reads.
Page are you on?
I don't know. I'm on page 1. Page 1 of 3. On 2, this threshold shall apply per donation.
Correct.
Rather than it be per donor, or not per donor, I think it should be in the aggregate. Because if a donor gives us $149,000 for a particular purpose, the next month gives us another $149,000 per. We'll never know that eventually they gave us $1 million for something that we didn't know was going on. Also, somewhere in here we need to add another sentence that all gifts less than $150,000 shall be reported to the Board of Trustees when given. That way we'll have a report each month, each whenever.
We can add that to number 5 or something, and put that in there. 6.
Okay. So we can look at either monthly or quarterly on that. I don't know if I need to see it every week. Right now we'll go with monthly. That's all I have.
That's I was going to suggest that we do that, probably do it anyway. If the substance of this changes or not, I think it's just good to know who we're getting gifts from. Let's go back really quickly to the this idea of a particular magic number, and 150 being that number. It may be helpful for us to kind of, I know I requested last time, and I tried to pull up the request. It just kept giving me an error on the trustee tracker. So maybe we can talk about that later, but I asked, I would like to see the data for the last 3 months on recent gifts. Do you have that information? How long did it take, and what?
I sent the largest on the trustee tracker of September and October, but not the little like $10 gifts that went straight to the school to help the cheerleaders or something like that. But the more major gifts, it's in the trustee tracker. I'm not sure if you.
Well, yeah, but it's giving me an error to pull it up. So could you just do me just a quick, give me a general sense of, how many gifts, large gifts, were given over those couple months, and if you have it, how long did it take for those to actually reach the classroom or the school?
We have about 16, 32, 40. We have about 45 that are pretty sizable that came in September and working into October. The challenge presents itself with sometimes there's the back and forth between what we need them to change and they're being willing to change it. So that addresses, I think, part of Trustee Jones' concern about how long things can take. It's not just coming to the board with them, but it's the essence of, we can't let you do that. Would you do it like this? Getting to yes is the goal. Right. So there's a number of them.
Let me build off
like
that for just a second, because that seems like it's, you've got this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's, I'm sure, critically important back and forth, because we need to make sure that from a district standpoint, we're protecting ourselves and we're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And that can be a fairly long process. Then you get to the point where you say, okay, hypothetically, we're good, but it may have been that back and forth led us to the beginning of the school year, and now we need to get this started, because if we don't get it started, then we're going to wait, have to wait another month to try to get these things. So I think that's the issue that I have, is I know that there's that back and forth, and 45, I don't know if that happened for every specific one of those, but that seems like a sizable amount of gifts to have occurred in a 2-month span. So when we get this idea of a magic number and 150 being the number, what is the average gift in those 2 months? I mean, if you could average that out.
An average gift would probably be about $22,000. There are about 12 on here that are over 100.
12 of the 40-something. Okay.
But they will either be on the December board cycle, or if we don't make it in time, they'll be in January. And so, it's a matter of getting everything compiled in the signatures.
What's the scope? Give me a general, and you may not be able to give me a general scope.
Well, one of Avance is one of them, and it's over $1 million. And another one is a mentoring program, CBM Cares, and it's in 4 of our middle school programs. Fleshman Hilliard wants to do something with us, and it'll probably be about $50,000.
So answer this question for me, because the second piece of my request was, what are the ramifications of that process being delayed as it relates to particularly to the schools?
Well, people are waiting to serve schools, because until the board has approved, we can't let them move forward. So it might hold up a playground, or it might hold up. Actually, there's a special deal on playgrounds right now, so they're hoping that they can get it, get the agreement in time to purchase the playground equipment.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you, Trustee Cowan.
Yeah, I've always, ever since I've been on the board, I thought this was kind of a strange policy. Somebody wants to give you money, and you're like, well, let's vote on it. We're going to give it. Maybe we won't let you give it. I think Austin's got the right idea. Do a summary at the end of the year. If TEA doesn't require that we have something here local, I'd be satisfied with taking the whole policy out. But $150,000 doesn't sound all that unreasonable, in that if somebody does want to give $75,000 worth of playground equipment, As it is now, they're liable to be waiting 2 or 3 months before they can do it. Thank goodness my churches, the donuts they give once a month to one of the schools is only $54. Otherwise, we would really have trouble.
Stale donuts.
Yeah, they'd be stale. But, I think the key thing is we want to make sure that when these people or businesses want to give money, and most of the time, if you decide you want to give some money, you want to see it implemented pretty quickly, especially like if it's a playground, that they're not waiting 2 or 3 months. To me, this is a roadblock. An unneeded roadblock. Granted, yes, it's got to pass the E-rate scrutiny and legal scrutiny, that type thing. And I'd be happy if we just got a report at the end of the year. But I don't think we need to do anything more to handicap people when they want to donate monies or things to the school that are of value. So I'm okay with this policy.
In kind too, as well.
Sometimes it might be some of both.
So
Total.
So the holdup. You talk about the holdup. Because I'm looking at the agenda and I know it comes before the board. So is there a holdup prior before this?
Well, it's that challenge of the donor has certain stipulations or things that they would like to have done as part of the gift, and whether or not we can accept them. And then we have to take it out of the agreement or ask them if they will change parts of it to be able to move forward, get it approved, and then come to you with it.
So it's still some administrative.
Yes, always, always. Yeah.
It just seems like
the only thing we don't.
And it's the board that's kind of.
It's a whole cycle.
It's a whole cycle.
Yeah, it's just that after it gets through the legal approval that we've completed, then it depends on when it hits. After legal approval, if it comes at a cycle that's out of the board cycle, it may be 2 months if it's right at the end of one.
But I was just saying, there's still schools must go through this process, and it's not necessarily the boards. Well, have we ever considered just ratifying all donations? Since I hear some boards, so have we considered that, Jim, that all donations can be ratified?
I certainly would be okay with that.
I understand, you can accept the donations and then, we just ratify the donations.
At the end of the year, sounds great.
I didn't know we considered that because I can see where the E-rate is where one concern that we need to look at that E-rate.
That won't change. Anything over $5,000 from E-rate will come through the ERCO office. Absolutely. Won't change.
Just want to know what they are.
Well, the school district I came from, we did that once a quarter. We brought a list of all donations and had it ratified.
I was just saying, can we ratify them?
Use the R word.
She did.
On donations.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with it. I think that was just satisfy all the concerns on that. We ratify the donations, and we still know. And if because the other thing I'm thinking about is equity. Because when you think about one of the questions when Target or whoever's donating, we kind of say, well, what schools is it going to? And making sure we're dividing this up, and it's not all going to one district and another district. We're all getting, in trustees, we can say, hey, have you thought about Comstock, or you thought about Burleson? They're our school. I think that's one of the things when I see the donations, is just seeing how, and then, you may shop at Target because Target give money, or shop at JCPenney's because, they gave a donation. You're like,
One time when I was with you guys to talk about Real School Gardens, Miss Bingham noticed that she did not have one. She's got one now. Okay. So, we do try that, especially if it's a district-wide opportunity. We want to make sure that everybody's got some of it, not just by trustee district, but maybe also by feeder pattern or other areas.
But I see accountability by coming to the board. We can say, hey, we want whatever. So I see the both. So I think we should consider in the policy, Jim, maybe let's just say we ratify all donations so board members can be aware and it can satisfy all 9 of us. Wouldn't that be a win-win?
The board will give me directions as to what they prefer to do. I'm certainly open.
So to pick up on that theme and a comment that Dr. Blackburn made, Dr. Blackburn wanted specific language that said the board should be notified of all minor gifts, maybe on a monthly basis. Is that consistent with what you said? So I'm looking at the way the policy is written right now, and that would be in the minor gifts, grants, and bequests section on page 2, the bottom of page 2. And it just it says that a sentence in there that says the board shall be notified of all minor gifts. What I would probably put a caveat on that is define that as $5,000 or more, so we're not getting notification about the donuts.
Yeah.
Thank you. But with that, what I'd like Faye and perhaps the rest of the administrative team to prepare in advance of the meeting this month is language that wipes out the board approval and just says that the board shall ratify all gifts at year end, consistent with the Austin policy. So
that's not what we said.
And that with the language that Dr. Blackburn proposed will be an amendment that I'll offer at the table in 2 weeks.
Dr. Blackburn, point of information.
Let me get Joyce from you.
I was good using the R word when we talked about on a monthly basis, and I was playing off of what Dr. Blackburn had said along with Trustee Know-it-all. I don't want to find out about the gifts at the end of the year. So with the directive to the board that Trustee Morath has just given, I'd also like for the board to prepare something that speaks to monthly ratification of gifts as opposed to a yearly ratification of gifts.
And I was thinking in the spirit, because I was listening to the board members, that it was satisfied that all board members that we ratify, you've already accepted a gift. It's not going to hold up the board. It's not going to hold up the process. You just put it on the agenda, accept it, and keep moving. And it kind of gives us to make sure we get a real school gardens. We have a couple in the south side. I don't know if y'all, but it just kind of helps us just to know. And sometimes I send thank you notes to them. So.
Is the compromise quarterly?
I mean, we're still talking about monthly notification. So the board is not going to miss anything on a monthly basis. What we're just talking about is when the board vote occurs.
But then you can't ask any questions.
There's no compromise at the end of the year.
Some of us can ask questions. I'm just saying at the table, it allows us when the ratification, if we can say, thank you, Jane, we appreciate that great donation, and it gives you the opportunity to thank people. So I'm trying to say we all come to a compromise here, and it satisfies each board member it's the middle of the road to compromise.
The compromise for me is quarterly.
Quarterly. I can agree with quarterly. So can we compromise on quarterly, guys?
We'll type up an amendment to
I'm not trying to make a decision.
the current policy as it is written and prepared for the board meeting this month, correct? Trustee Jones? Sir.
I'm sorry, as a clarification, that will include more items than we're currently voting on, because we would be ratifying everything above $5,000.
No, it could be our currently, what would we ratify? What do we accept donations at the board table now for Jane?
25,000.
So we can just ratify, we won't hold up.
Okay, well, just for clarity, do you want notifications of everything that's 25 and above, or do you want notifications of everything that's 5 and above?
25 and above.
Okay.
25 is
so
fine.
Notifications monthly of everything that's 25 and above, and then ratification quarterly.
Yeah, we're going to bring them quarterly. We need to get them out.
Trustee Jones? And then Trustee Mitchke.
Was going to be the clarifying question, so I think we got there collectively. But I want to echo something that Trustee Nuttall said. It is important for this body to be able to know and to thank, and I believe that is a very important part of our responsibility. We're advocates for this district, we're the ambassadors, and it is proper for us to officially be able to give recognition to those who serve this district. So just don't want to lose that in the thread. Thank you.
Last
Yeah, 2 points. I assume, Jane, that you guys do a great job thanking the donors, even if it doesn't get to the board table, that people who donate are thanked. But second, I'm a little bit concerned about the ratification idea that, well, what happens if we don't ratify it? Because then, you know,
You haven't yet not approved.
There's not a legal.
Okay, well, so we're talking about ratification as one alternative versus having the administration go through a process where the ERCO officer approves the gift, the legal department approves the gift, and so the thing with ratification is it's an extra step that puts us in the position of, well, we have to unwind it. But based on what Jane just said, that doesn't look like it's going to be a realistic possibility. I would be able to support this ratification alternative. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Aw.
She's been around long.
Moving on to the next item, CH Local. Again, a second read. You have CH Local pulled up. Sire, I think the changes begin on page 10.
Correct.
It's a recap.
What this is a clarification of what's considered an authorized and unauthorized transaction. This was rewritten with the help of legal, and we think that it does a much better job to clarify that. I guess the big clarification is that an item that is taken to the board and has been approved by the board for procurement, and in fact has a contract, and the contract has gone through the administrative process and has been approved, but there is no purchase order, then there would be administrative consequences to the individuals who did not do a purchase order, but it would not be brought back to the board for ratification.
Trustee Form.
This is another policy change that I'm troubled by. And if you and I'm on page 11 of 22, if you just look at the statement that says, and I think it's like the fourth line, it says failure to follow established administrative procedures shall not require board ratification. Failure to follow established administrative procedures will not come before the board. So basically what that says to me is, first of all, it says they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Failure to follow established administrative procedures. That makes no sense. Why would we be authorizing a policy that basically says there has been a failure to follow administrative procedures?
If I might,
You might.
and you may have covered it, and I'm sorry, I was just absent, but we have hundreds of administrative procedures. Teachers sometimes fail, or staff members sometimes fail to be in their class at time, or to come to work on time. They fail to file the S-54 or sign the S-54 and date it on time. There's lots of administrative procedures. Yes.
Excuse me. Look, because we're going off on a whole nother.
No, those are. I think it's relevant.
My issue with this policy is not about if you did the SR-54s in time. This is about the expenditure of money. It's about how we are handling the expenditure of money. Not about any of those other things. And if a employee has not followed the procedures in handling procurement, that can set up all kinds of issues for this district.
Trustee Nettle.
I said at the last meeting, this is a piece people problem and not a policy problem. I agree with Trustee Foreman. I'm talking about failure to follow established administrative procedures should not require board ratification. And failure to follow established administrative procedures. It seems to me, once again, if we expect children to follow the code of conduct and we expect there are consequences, and the consequences is you must come before the board to get it ratified because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And if we expect teachers to, we have high expectations. We're raising the bar in the schools and the classroom. I feel that it is only proper to raise the bar at this table and have those same high expectations for rigor and excellent classroom instruction. So I don't understand why we are making it easier for staff not to follow policy. And then if teachers are absent, they're going to get written up, or we have all these rules for the game, the ground game, but yet the air game, they can come and change policy to fit because they don't want to do what they need to do to make it happen on behalf. We must lead by example. So I totally disagree with this policy because it seems to me it's a people problem and not a policy problem. And every time we can't follow the rules, we want to change the policy to fit the rules that we don't want to follow.
Well, in fact, it says that the failure will lead to the individuals to be subject to disciplinary action.
Is that going on now? Because I think that was in the policy.
It says it right here. No, it's new. Look at page 11, and it says failure to follow the established administrative procedures shall not require board ratifications. Employees who fail to follow the established administrative procedure will be subject to disciplinary actions.
Mr. Terry, we follow many ratifications because we failed to follow administrative procedures. Am I correct? We already had these policies that we should follow, our checks and balances that we should follow anyway. So now, because it seems to me we can't follow them, we're going to change policy that we don't have to bring certain ratifications to the board. I mean, that's your consequences. I'm just trying to understand, and I don't need you to answer. I'm good. But I just think it's a people problem, not a policy problem. Following our rules.
Trustee Rapp and Trustee Solis.
The sentence, employees who fail to follow established administrative procedures will be subject to disciplinary action. The verb in that sentence is will. That is different than may. So do I understand this correctly, that every single time a failure occurs, there will be some sort of disciplinary sanction to the
Yes, and we have those sanctions in Regulation D.
So that's not the case currently. That this is essentially a stricter policy than the one we had before.
We think it adds
in addition
teeth
to the list of authorized transactions, the definitions that are provided there in terms of the specific steps that you take. That's a substantial increase in clarification as to administrative procedure that's required, because what it just says before that is it says I think it says may, the board may ratify. And so what we have now instead is you have a very explicit delineation of the conditions. And so it's your intent to try to codify for clarity your own processes with regard to these ratifications.
Correct.
Well, this is largely the same conversation we had last month. I assume it's going to be the same conversation we'll have again in 2 weeks, so I look forward to it again, board members, then.
Got it.
Trustee Solis.
I won't add anything other than to say the way you read the sentence has a lot to do, I think, particularly of how you perceive this particular policy change. Failure to follow established administrative procedures instead of failure to follow administrative procedures. This is administration and administrative procedures that you're attempting to shore up so that we don't have the issues that we have had before.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Jones, did you?
Have our auditors looked at this?
Yes.
Have they signed off on it?
Yes.
Both internal audit and
Well, internal audit, I thought I had sent that to you all, but internal audit, the external auditor essentially said that they cannot participate in the in decisions in within our organizations per se, but did not see anything wrong with it, and the internal audit had no problem with it.
Okay,
We'll try to resend those emails to you.
that's fine. What problem exactly would, based on things that might have come before the board before, what specifically wouldn't have come before the board based on this change? So give me an example.
Well, I think that prior to me assuming this position as a CFO, that I think that the common practice was that if you had board approval and you had a contract and you forgot a PO, people would go back and do a retro.
Excuse me.
That's not acceptable to me. And so the question was, well, how do you really look at that, and how is it clarified? And it needs to be clarified. So this is essentially saying, you have to remember that essentially some boards approve the budget, and then after that, unless it's over, $50,000 and has to go through the process, how it's spent is certainly up to administration. So what we're doing here is we're saying that if you have not followed the administrative procedure, we will take administrative action for not following those procedures.
So in terms of the last, just make an argument, the last year, is there a specific transaction that came before this body that this would have, had it been in place, we would not have had that step?
Yes.
Which one?
Well, I would have to go back and look at it, but there are also, three other categories. I mean, one category where there's no approval by a board and there's no contract, so that has to come back to the board. There's also the case where there is a board approval and there is a contract, but it's overspent by 25%. And then there's a case where there's board approval, but in fact there is no contract and work has started, or the purchase has started.
I think it'd be helpful.
So all of those come back to the board for ratification. It's just the one category where you as a board have approved the procurement and the contract has been approved. It's just the work has started before there was a purchase order. And purchase order is how we track all of our expenditures.
And I'm good with that. I'm just trying to make sure everybody's very clear where this applies and where this doesn't, because I think that would help ease a lot of concerns. And the only other thing I would add is typically on something where you have a failure of administrative procedures, trying to understand what is the disciplinary action. I didn't see where that was referenced, but it would just be helpful to know what that looks like.
In Regulation D?
So just Reg D is where it would be.
Yes. So regulation, administrative regulation.
Thank you so much.
Trustee Mitchke?
Is this a provision that is unique to Dallas, that if we adopted it, would other districts, or do other districts have a provision like this?
I'm not sure that other districts have it in terms of in policy, but I just got back from a conference of CFOs and around the state of Texas, and we talked that specifically about that problem of work starting without purchase orders, and it is common practice to take administrative action against individuals that don't put in the take that step. But I'm not sure, and I'd have to survey that most of it is not in policy, it's in regulations.
And if I could just make a quick comment, because the regulation is waiting to be adopted if this policy is actually adopted. So if it would make it easier for you all, we can add a reference to that actual regulation. And I think that would help you all.
Can we see the red? Because I think we asked for that.
It's not done at this point, it hasn't been signed off.
You're just saying, putting language in the policy that refers to regulation.
If this were to pass.
Are you done?
No, I want to follow up on that. If there's a...
This is essentially disciplinary action. If it's the first time, it's a verbal warning, Look, you may have overseen, you've got to remember, and we're certainly taking action to get that got to have a purchase order. The second time the same individual does it, then it is a written reprimand to the file. And the third time the same individual does it, then it will be, a portion of the amount of money, all of the money, and/or termination would be available to the supervisors. Comes up to the chief level.
So, I'm just trying to figure out how this works practically. When a ratification has to come before the board, it's because the administration has found that the policies weren't, or the procedures weren't being followed. So you have to come to us. You discover the error. We don't actually discover it. You bring the error to us. And so we have to trust you to find the error and come to the board so that we can have a ratification under the way things currently work.
Well, I certainly don't want to admit it, but I tried to bring all errors, including my own error, meaning my department's error, and it's on this board agenda. So that's $23,000 that we did not catch that went over a contract amount. So I treat all people
I'm trying to get to a larger point, though.
Okay,
I
sorry.
appreciate the work you're doing and the integrity with which you do it. But what I'm saying is that the deterrent effect of having the board do a ratification, and so we'll have employees follow all the administrative procedures, in part because they don't want to have to come before this board and explain a ratification. But the way the ratification is discovered is somebody in the administration saying, we need a ratification and we have to come to the board. The board doesn't discover anything that needs ratification on its own. It's only being told by the administration that we found that our procedures weren't being followed, and now we're requesting the board to ratify. And so what you're saying here is that rather than come to the board and have the board do the ratification, you're saying you're going to discover the error the same way, and then you're going to have a mandatory discipline approach if the error is discovered and an employee has not followed policy.
Correct.
But in both cases, the current system and what you're proposing to do by regulation, it's not the board discovering an error that is in need of ratification. It's the administration discovering the error and then having to figure out a way to fix it.
Correct.
And have some action being taken for failing to follow the policy.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else on this topic?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay.
Jim, so how many, it said in the current policy, without an authorized transaction, no obligation would be honored or paid by the district. How many of them have we paid, because we had that in current policy?
Well, the ones that we have caught now, we have not paid. It has all been brought to the board. You have done over the last few months. You've done a bunch of ratifications. This particular one is probably dealing with minor amounts, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Some of them are certainly larger amounts. Now, remember that approving this will allow us to administratively take care of those. We will have ratifications in which people start work without a contract or board approval. Or if they have board approval but no contract, they will be brought to you. So you will still see, well, hopefully we're going to do an end with that because we're taking other administrative procedures to put an end to it. But if there are other types of procurement that may go on that will need to be brought back to the board for. And the deterrent in that case, those individuals will be in front of you saying, "Mi culpa."
So who issues the punishment? So is
It
your
goes.
staff person
It'll probably be up to the supervisor, but all punishment has to be signed off by a chief.
What's the accountability here? That it's the chief and it's their department that mess up and they don't want us to know about it. And I mean, where's the accountability to make sure that
The bill won't get paid because we catch it and we're not going to pay the bill until we have a sign off by a chief.
But where's the accountability of, like we had to pay, all the ratifications we had to do that was in millions of dollars.
Right.
And so we're responsible for the budget. So where is that accountability if it's the chief's and you're not, you catch it?
I catch it. And it's not going to get paid until you'll have the outside vendors very unhappy. And if I need to, I will take it certainly to my boss and say, look, these need to be, the disciplinary action needs to be meted out so that we can pay these bills. Another area that I'm working desperately on is rising to one of my priorities is the timeliness of our paying accounts payable and our bills. And I expect that in the future that will go a lot quicker. So I will not be sitting on and waiting for. And part of the reason that I'm bringing this for and that clarifications is so that for minor amounts, we can go ahead. And as I say, you've already approved the budget, you've already approved the procurement, and the contract has already been approved. It's just an individual that didn't take the time to put it in as a purchase order to notify accounting saying, hey, we spent this money, we've tied up this money.
But there's a policy and already controls that you should already follow that. Be following.
That's right.
Already.
Right, it says you're supposed to use the purchase order, but some people don't do that.
Well, we need to do.
I'll do this real quick.
Last word, Joyce.
Last word.
On this topic. I'm not shutting you down for the day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jim, you said there are 3 areas that this policy doesn't apply to, and it's a no approval by the board.
No, the policy still applies. It's just I'm saying that these particulars transactions in which board has approved the budget, the board has approved the procurement, and there is a contract, but an individual did not put in purchase order, they will go through administrative discipline. However, if a board has approved the procurement along with the budget, but there is no contract, that's still going to be brought to you as a ratification.
You said there were 3 areas.
Well, let me keep going. Okay. Then the next one is if somebody starts work or purchases something without board approval and without a contract, that will also be brought to you. And then the third one is that if in fact there's board approval and there is a contract, but it is over expensed by more than 25%, it will be brought back to you for ratification.
Okay, thank you. Now, could that be identified somewhere in this policy, those areas, so that there will be no misunderstanding as to directly what this...
It is. It's listed right here where it goes and talks to you about transactions considered, it starts on page 10. The transactions considered authorized if one of the following conditions is met. Okay.
No.
And then, yes, and so anything.
Let me tell you what I need.
Okay.
We're going to go through words. What I need is somewhere in here to identify those 3 particular things that you just talked about and say this does not apply to no approval by board approval and overspent.
Just want to stay on top.
And that third one that you talked about.
Okay.
And that'll work for me.
3 areas for ratifications needed.
Yeah. Okay.
Before we move on to the other policies, we want to go back to the regular agenda because we have some bond attorneys here that we need to discuss. Construction, which section, Miguel?
It's on A, 9A, B, and C.
It's on the refunding bond?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move to 9AB under budget amendments and related item, financial services, and then we'll follow up with C, and then we'll come back to policy. Take it away, Mr. Terry.
Are we talking about 9AB?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What we bring forward to you is a new refunding of bonds. We have 2006 and 2008 bonds, which we can call in and we can do a refunding. The market last week was extremely favorable, and running the calculations by refunding these bonds, we would save approximately $20 million. This week, the market has moved away from us, and it's the savings probably around $16 million. But I will say this, is that if you all approve this, it gives us 6 months to watch the market, and when the market is favorable again to a point that I think we should pull the trigger, we would then have the authority to pull the trigger and save the taxpayers, I'm hoping at least $20 million. That reduces our long-term debt by $20 million. The last time I did that, we saved $50 million.
Do you have a minimum NPV savings that you'll pull the trigger on? Is it 20?
No. Oh, well, in dollar amounts, well, that's in dollar amounts what I'm looking for.
But that's sort of your own internal loose guideline. It's not like a hard trigger or anything.
No, it isn't. So if it's $19,575,000, I'll probably pull the trigger.
Okay.
You're asking for a 6-month window to watch the market and pull the trigger if necessary. And what happens?
Yes.
What happens if we don't pull the trigger in that 6 months?
Goes away.
Trustee Jones?
Yeah, so just to clarify it, and Marath said it, but the NPV savings is really, from your perspective, this deal is in the money, essentially. If we can get no less than what amount? Is it?
Well, I think the actual NPV is 5%.
So it's a 5% target.
Yeah.
That's what we're really looking for. And then based on rates, you'll look.
I usually want more.
Right. No,
A little bit.
I'd love to see it myself. And this is important because the markets, have been lately in our favor. Of course, with the change in Congress, it's going to be interesting to see.
Get political here.
Well, but there's an interesting question, and so markets tend to reflect any number of things. So it's not a question, Nancy, of being political. It's a question of being realistic.
It was just a joke.
I understand.
Joke.
You have to raise your hand when you tell jokes.
So
This is my joke sign. That was an official joke.
Sorry.
Thank you. Trustee Jones, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to stress to this board, it is good to give our CFO and our advisors, as well as us, the wiggle room to make sure that if there are savings to be captured, we can capture them. And I appreciate you bringing this and continually being proactive in the fiscal management, especially on our capital side. So thank you.
Is any other questions? Okay, let's move on to C. 9AC, consider and take possible action to approve underwriters, etc. Mr. Terry?
We have identified 4 companies that make up, in the vernacular of the industry, the syndicate. It would be the senior manager that would manage this refunding is Morgan Stanley. Mr. Reed, I believe, is in the audience. He'll stand up and take a bow. J.P. Morgan Securities would also be one of the members, along with Southwest Securities, and Ramirez and Company would be the MWBE company.
Trustees? No questions? All right, let's move. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. And we're back to policy.
You better watch it, man. I might say something.
I'm gonna get out quickly. When you get to the decision, get out quickly.
Thank you.
All right, Trustee Cowan, we are now back to 6A3, consider and take possible action.
In a second read, could you give us a recap?
Sure.
So the policy DBA, the adjustment, it was a TASB recommendation and discusses not using an employee's social security number as an identifier, which has been a practice that has already been employed by our district, but this is aligning with the recommendation and updating the policy accordingly.
Questions? Trustee Jones?
Really more of a clarifying question. When people do background checks, do they use a social security number?
No, which is actually one of the greatest challenges as an identifier. So one of the challenges that districts run into, and I've been in conversations with the Texas Education Agency about it, that's the unique identifier. So, for example, my maiden name, if I was printed under my maiden name, get married, you wouldn't know and might have difficulty finding me. So we are in conversations about how do you identify employees, but it is not used. You're welcome.
Just on the alternative work. So for instance, in the summertime, I think we go to 4 days.
I don't know yet.
It's not DEA?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is DBA.
DBA.
It's okay. it's
I left the room for a minute, so.
It's okay.
Since we're there, go
It's
ahead.
next.
Okay. Yeah, you want me to jump on over to
Jump
DEA?
on over.
We're good with DBA?
Sounds like
Okay. So, have I got it now?
you have the floor.
Thank goodness, what a cover-up. So on DEA, where it says alternative work arrangement, I know in the summertime we do the 4-day week, but with that, it gives you where you could work Saturdays or 5-day or 6-day, or is that what that's for?
Yeah, that wasn't the original intent, but that could be categorized in here as well. What this was really talking about is alternative work location. And so if you have an employee, and at last month's briefing, there were some questions about what kind of employees would this apply to? What are some examples? For example, a graphic designer who does most of their work behind a computer screen, that there would be a process for them to gain approval to pursue an alternative work arrangement.
So, I mean, just hypothetically, you could maybe have, if you were doing some kind of graphics art, you have a great artist up in New York, and they could just do it via they wouldn't have to move.
Correct. In theory, right now we've really been focused on local talent. So if you have...
Certainly open the door.
Correct. Okay. So it's really staying current with some of the employment trends.
Trustee Jones?
Yeah, I had asked this last go round pretty much to understand which positions it would apply to and which positions it wouldn't. I mean, right. I get a lot of heartburn thinking this could apply to, for example, somebody as important as an executive director or somebody phoning it in at an even higher level. So I just want to make sure we're clear about the employee groups that we believe this would be beneficial or otherwise not be in conflict with anything that we would want to see. Sometimes, local is good. You want to buy local. So I just want to make sure that if we're putting this out there that we know which work groups it applies to. And
sure. So there will be an accompanying regulation if the board moves forward with approving DEA local. And there's an exhibit, a form that would need to be completed when a request is being made for an alternative work arrangement. And that will go to the cabinet level for review to ensure that the work outcomes can still be accomplished for a given role. As we know, this is not conducive to some positions, and there are others that may make more sense.
I'd like that qualified before we move forward, as opposed to waiting after the fact. I mean, I can appreciate that you want to have the discretion, and that's fair, but I also want the disclosure now about which positions could be considered and which ones would never be considered.
I don't feel that I'm in a position currently to say what could never be considered, because there could be a role out there, I mean, in a district of 20,000 employees, that it may make sense for that to be the case that does not currently exist.
So in school leadership, let's take an important area, which is pretty much the criticality of our mission. What in there would apply? I mean, I can appreciate vendors or graphic artists or some supportive function, but I'm talking front line. So to me, I have a really hard time with telecommuting in some areas of the work we do.
Let me give you a couple of examples. You know, a lot of it depends on the position and the outcome, because, you know, really, the real question is, can they produce what we want them to produce? So there are various sections of graphic design, our IT offices that could. A lot of different places do that. Even in school leadership, let's just imagine that we're trying to repurpose or redefine the role of the principalship, as a lot of researchers are trying to do right now, trying to figure out ways to prevent principal burnout, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we create an executive position that's just purely administrative. They do all the UIL requirements, the Title I reports, the after-action reports, and all these things that require writing and administrative things, and not really leadership or instructional leadership. Let's just say we do that. That's a position that could probably do half time from home, depending on their availability. Maybe somebody would like to work through their pregnancy rather than just, stay home totally, because a doctor says they have to stay off their feet X amount of time. So there's lots of different circumstances that I would hope that we are slow to proscribe with regard to who can work from home.
Well, I guess I take no issue with some of what you just said. What I'm concerned about is that we have employees not even living in our backyard who, telecommute from, I don't know, Seattle or somewhere, which is not the intent of the way in which a district of our size and our consideration would want to work. Although in today's world, it's highly possible to set up structures, and large corporations do in some cases. My concern is around education. It's a very high touch, very relationship-centric, very interactive way of doing work, and I, just want to make sure we're not creating a structure that doesn't support our mission, or making it too easy for folks to not be present when it's necessary to be so.
Well, Trustee Jones, I understand the point. But I also want to make sure that we keep our innovative edge open. Right now, a lot of people are talking about blended learning, flipped classrooms. They're talking about Khan Academy and expertise.